We're taught that beauty is armor, that if we're lovely enough, graceful enough, perfect enough, we'll be chosen, protected, loved. We paint our faces and bind our waists and grow our hair long because somewhere deep in our bones, we believe the fairy tale, that external perfection will shield us from the cruelty of the world. But when you're standing in front of a mirror, watching clumps of your hair fall like dying leaves onto cold stone, your stepmother's satisfied smile reflected behind you, you learn something far more vicious. Beauty isn't armor at all. It's a target. And the people who should protect you are often the ones holding the blade. My name is Vera, and I was beautiful once. Not in the way that stops conversations or launches wars, nothing so dramatic. But I had my mother's hair, thick and dark as midnight, falling in waves to my waist. In our pack, hair was sacred. It was identity. It was the one thing that marked you as worthy of consideration during the mating ceremony, where unmated wolves were presented to visiting alphas, seeking alliances through marriage. I was 18. It was supposed to be my year. The ceremony was tomorrow, and my stepmother, Duchess Marin of the Shadow Pine Pack, had just ensured I would enter it as bald as a newborn pup. "There," she said, setting down the shears with a satisfaction that made my stomach turn. "Now you look exactly as you are, plain, forgettable, a suitable reflection of your worth." I stared at my reflection. The girl looking back was a stranger. Naked scalp, eyes too large in a face, suddenly all angles and vulnerability. My head felt cold, exposed, like I'd been skinned. Behind me, my stepsister, Celestine, golden-haired, perfect Celestine, watched with something like pity. But she said nothing. She never did. "The ceremony is at dawn," Marin continued, smoothing her own immaculate silver-threaded hair. "You'll still attend, of course. Your father insists, though I can't imagine why. No alpha will look twice at you now." She leaned close, her breath hot against my bare scalp. "And that, my dear, is exactly as it should be." She left me there, shaking in the ruins of who I'd been. I should have cried. A normal girl would have collapsed, would have raged, would have begged her father to intervene. But I'd learned long ago that tears were currency wasted on people who enjoyed collecting them. So instead, I did what I always did when the world became unbearable. I disappeared into a story. In my mind, I became a queen who'd shaved her head as a declaration of war. A warrior who needed no adornment, because her blade spoke for her. A phoenix who burned away everything beautiful to rise as something fiercer. I wrapped myself in narratives the way other girls wrapped themselves in silk, and I survived. That's what they don't tell you about survival. It's not brave. It's not beautiful. It's just the thing you do because the alternative is letting them win, and some part of you, stubborn and feral and refusing to die, won't allow it. My father found me an hour later, still sitting in front of that mirror. Lord Dominic Ashford had been a good man once. I remembered a version of him who'd carried me on his shoulders, who'd called me his little moon because I was born during a lunar eclipse. But my mother's death had hollowed him out, and Marin had filled the empty spaces with her poison until there was nothing left of the man who'd loved me. "Vera," he said quietly. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry. About your hair. Are you?" The words came out flat, empty. "Marin says it was an accident, that you'd been using her shears without permission and what? I cut off my own hair the night before the ceremony?" I finally turned to look at him. "Do you actually believe that, Father? Or is it just easier to pretend you do?" He flinched. Good. I wanted him to hurt, even if it was just a fraction of what I felt. "The ceremony happens regardless," he said, his voice taking on that formal tone he used when he was playing Lord instead of Father. "You'll wear the traditional white gown. You'll stand with the other unmated females. Who knows?" He attempted a smile that died on his lips. "Perhaps your uniqueness will intrigue someone." Uniqueness. I tasted the word like ash. Is that what we're calling it? "Vera, get out." He did. He always did. It was his greatest talent, leaving me when I needed him most. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by my window and watched the moon travel across the sky. In a few hours, I'd be standing in the grand hall with 24 other hopeful girls, All of them beautiful and whole and worthy. And I'd be the spectacle. The bald girl. The one they'd whisper about and pity and thank the gods they weren't. The mating ceremony wasn't about love. It was about alliances, bloodlines, and power. Alphas came from across the territories seeking brides who would strengthen their packs, bear strong pups, bring valuable connections. I had none of those things. I was the daughter of a minor lord, with no significant pack ties, no wolf form of my own, an omega without even the ability to shift. And now, I didn't even have hair. Tomorrow, I would be invisible, dismissed. The cautionary tale girls would reference when they counted their blessings. But I'd survive it. I always did. I just had no idea that survival was about to become far more complicated. Because while I sat there, mourning the girl I'd been, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories was riding toward Shadowpine with his entourage. King Theron, they called him. The Frost King. The wolf who cannot die. I'd heard the stories everyone had. He was massive, brutal, ancient beyond reckoning. He'd ruled for over 2 centuries, taking no mate, trusting no one, crushing rebellions with a ruthlessness that made even other alphas nervous. He came to these ceremonies out of political obligation, they said. He never chose anyone. He'd simply make an appearance, remind the lesser packs of his dominance, and leave. But this time would be different. This time, he'd take one look at the bald, broken Omega girl standing in the corner, trying to disappear into her own skin, and he'd choose her. Not because of some mystical mate bond or prophetic dream, not because he saw some hidden beauty that others missed, but because in that moment, when our eyes met across that hall, he'd see something that every powerful man eventually seeks and never finds, someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. And those, I would learn, are the most dangerous people of all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I had to survive the ceremony. First, I had to stand in front of hundreds of wolves and let them see exactly how thoroughly I'd been destroyed. First, I had to believe, even for a moment, that I was more than the sum of my humiliations. The stories I told myself to survive had always been lies. Tomorrow, I'd discover which lies were worth dying for, and which truths were worth living for. Before we dive into Vera's story, if you love alpha romance with emotional depth and unexpected twists, check out this book, The Alpha's Second Chance, currently shown on your screen. Full link in the description below. Now, let's continue. Chapter 1, The Ceremony of Shame. The Grand Hall of Shadowpine had never looked more beautiful, which meant it had never felt more like a torture chamber. Dawn light filtered through the stained glass windows, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. The stone floors had been polished until they gleamed like dark water. Garlands of wolfsbane and silver lilies, traditional mating flowers, hung from every archway, their scent thick and cloying in the still air. At the far end of the hall, the Alpha's dais stood empty, waiting for the visiting dignitaries who would sit in judgment of us all. Us, the unmated females, the merchandise. There were 23 of us lined up along the eastern wall, arranged by rank and family prominence. I stood at the very end, of course. The position itself was an insult so far from the center that I was practically behind a column. But today, I was grateful for it. Maybe, if I was lucky, I could fade into the marble and cease to exist entirely. By the gods, someone whispered. Is that Vera Ashford? So much for invisibility. I kept my eyes forward, my spine straight, my hands clasped in front of me. The traditional white ceremony gown felt obscene against my bare scalp. Every other girl had spent hours having their hair arranged, intricate braids woven with silver thread, cascading curls adorned with crystals, elaborate updos that showcased the elegant lines of their necks. Their hair was their glory, their promise, their proof of health and fertility. I had nothing, just naked skin and the echo of what I'd lost. What happened to her? Another voice murmured. I heard she has mange. No. I heard she tried to run away, and her stepmother punished her. Who would choose her now? She looks ill. The whispers crawled over my skin like insects. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them exactly what had happened, to watch Marin's reputation crumble under the weight of truth. But what would be the point? In our world, Stepmothers were expected to be cruel. It was practically tradition, and daughters who complained about it were simply ungrateful. Celestine stood 12 positions ahead of me, her golden hair swept up in an elaborate crown of braids. She looked like a princess from a children's tale, all soft curves and innocent beauty. She hadn't said a word to me this morning. Hadn't even looked at me when we'd been lined up. Coward, I thought viciously. You're a coward, and your silence makes you complicit. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't fair. Celestine was just as trapped as I was, just in a prettier cage. Marin controlled everything, our clothing, our friends, our futures. The difference was that Celestine had learned to appease the monster, while I had never quite managed the trick. The massive oak doors at the end of the hall groaned open. Every girl straightened, every breath held. The visiting alphas began to enter. First came Alpha Ronan of the Eastmarch Pack, a barrel-chested man with rust-colored hair and a laugh like thunder. He was kind, by reputation. A good choice, for whoever caught his eye. Behind him, Alpha Sienna of the Riverside Pack, one of the few female alphas in the territories, her dark skin gleaming with ritual oils, her eyes sharp as broken glass. They kept coming. Alpha after alpha. Some young, some old, some beautiful, some battle-scarred. Each one took their position on the dais, their eyes already scanning our line, cataloging, dismissing, selecting. This was business to them. We were potential alliances wrapped in white silk. I recognized most of them from my father's political dinners. I'd served them wine, listened to their boasts, faded into the background like good daughters were supposed to do. None of them had ever truly seen me before. They certainly wouldn't see me now. The hall had almost filled when the temperature dropped. It wasn't gradual. One moment, the morning was warm with spring promise. The next, my breath misted in front of my face. Frost crept across the windows. The candles flickered and dimmed. Everyone felt it. The shift in the air. The weight of something vast and predatory entering the space. The conversations died. Every wolf in the hall turned toward the doors, and King Theron walked into my life like winter incarnate. I'd heard the stories. Everyone had. The Frost King, the immortal Alpha, the wolf who cannot die, 200 years old, give or take a few decades. More powerful than any alpha in living memory. Brutal, merciless, and utterly alone by choice. The stories hadn't prepared me for the reality of him. He was tall, absurdly tall, towering over even the largest alphas present. His hair was black as a raven's wing, shot through with silver that caught the light, like starlight on ice. His face was all harsh angles and sharp edges, beautiful, the way a blade is beautiful, clean and lethal, and utterly without mercy. He wore black leather and dark furs, and when he moved, it was with a predator's grace that made every instinct I had scream danger. But it was his eyes that stopped my heart. Silver. Pure. Molten silver. Like the moon reflected in still water. Ancient eyes that had seen centuries pass, that had watched kingdoms rise and fall, that held no warmth, no hope, no humanity. Dead eyes in a living face. He swept into the hall without acknowledging anyone, his fur cloak trailing behind him like spilled ink. 4 guards followed massive wolves in human form, their hands on their weapons, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. King Theron took his place at the center of the dais, and when he sat, it was with the casual arrogance of someone who knew that everyone in the room would die before he did. Lord Caldris, the ceremony master, stepped forward. His voice shook only slightly. Honored alphas, noble lords and ladies, we gather today to celebrate the sacred tradition of the mating ceremony. Before you stand the finest unmated females of Shadowpine Pack, each one worthy of consideration, each one offering the promise of strong bloodlines and prosperous alliances. I wanted to laugh at that. Finest, worthy, promises, such pretty lies we told ourselves. The ceremony will proceed as tradition dictates, Lord Caldris continued. Each alpha may approach any female who interests them. If multiple alphas desire the same female, her family will negotiate terms. If no alpha approaches a female, she will be presented again at next season's ceremony, which was a polite way of saying, Rejected girls get to experience this humiliation all over again in 6 months. Alphas of the assembled packs. Lord Caldris raised his hands. You may begin your selection. The hall erupted into controlled chaos. Alpha Ronan rose immediately, his eyes fixed on a beautiful beta girl named Larissa, 3 positions down from Celestine. He approached with a smile, spoke quietly to her, and her face lit up with relief and joy. First match. It had taken less than 30 seconds. Others followed. Alpha Sienna chose a fierce-looking girl with copper hair. A young alpha from the Western Territories approached Celestine, and I watched my stepsister's performance of demure interest, perfect as always. Within minutes, more than half the girls had alphas standing before them, negotiations beginning, families beaming with pride. I remained against my column, untouched, exactly as expected. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I'd known this would happen. I told myself that freedom from this spectacle was its own kind of victory. I told myself a lot of lies that morning, but then I felt it. That crawling sensation of being watched. That pressure against your skin that means predator eyes have found prey. I looked up, and met the silver gaze of King Theron. He was staring at me. Not past me, not through me, but directly at me, with an intensity that made my knees weak. His expression hadn't changed, still that same cold, carved from ice blankness, but his eyes were locked on mine with a focus that felt physical. I couldn't look away, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Around us, the ceremony continued. Voices negotiated, families celebrated. But in that moment, the world had narrowed to just 2 points. His silver eyes and my thundering heart. He stood. The hall went silent again. King Theron descended from the dais with that same predatory grace, and every person in the room stepped back to give him space. He didn't acknowledge them, didn't acknowledge anyone. He simply walked across the polished stone floor, his boots echoing in the sudden quiet, his eyes never leaving mine. He was coming toward me. No, that was impossible. I was seeing things. He was walking toward someone behind me, someone I hadn't noticed, someone actually worthy of. He stopped directly in front of me. Up close, he was even more terrifying, massive and ancient, and utterly inhuman despite his human shape. I could feel the power radiating off him like heat from a forge. Could smell ice and pine and something wild that made my stomach clench with instinctive fear. You, he said. His voice was deep, rough, like grinding stone. What's your name? My mouth had gone dry. Vera Ashford. Your Majesty. He tilted his head slightly, studying me the way a scholar might study an interesting insect. His eyes traced my bare scalp, my 2 large eyes, my trembling hands. There was no disgust in his expression, no pity either. Just curiosity. Cold, detached curiosity. Why is your head bare? The question was so direct, so unexpected, that I almost laughed. Almost. My stepmother cut my hair, I heard myself say, last night, to ensure no alpha would choose me. I don't know why I told him the truth. Maybe because lies seemed pointless in front of those ancient eyes. Maybe because some part of me wanted to expose Marin's cruelty to the one person in the room who might actually matter. Maybe because I was so far past caring about consequences that honesty felt like a final rebellion. Something flickered in his expression. Not quite emotion, more like recognition. And yet here you stand, he said softly. Knowing you'd be humiliated. Knowing you'd be stared at and whispered about. You came anyway. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. His silver eyes pinned me in place. You chose to survive. That's interesting. The word hung between us like a blade. Then King Theron turned to face the room. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the hall, cold and absolute as a death sentence. I choose this one, Vera Ashford. She will return with me to Frostholm as my mate. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the hall exploded. My father surged forward, his face purple with shock. Your Majesty, surely you cannot be serious. She's barely ranked. She has no wolf. She is what I have chosen. Theron's voice dropped to a lethal softness. Are you questioning my judgment? Lord Ashford? My father went white. No, Your Majesty. I only meant, then we are finished here. Theron looked down at me, and for just a moment, something almost like amusement touched his features. Gather your things, Vera Ashford. We leave within the hour. He walked away, his guards falling in behind him, leaving me standing there in my white gown and bare head. The entire hall staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to horror to jealous fury. Celestine looked like she might faint. Marin looked like she wanted to murder me where I stood. And I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. I'd just been chosen by the most dangerous alpha in existence. I was being taken away from everything I'd ever known, to a kingdom of ice and death, to live with a man who'd crushed rebellions with his bare hands and hadn't taken a mate in 2 centuries. I should have been terrified. Instead, all I could think was, at least I'll never have to look at Marin's satisfied smile again. It wasn't much of a silver lining, but I'd survived on less. Chapter 2. The Cold Journey North. I had 1 hour to pack my entire life into a single trunk. Marin made sure I understood that very clearly when she cornered me in my room. Her face twisted with a rage so pure it was almost beautiful. You conniving little whore, she hissed, slamming the door behind her. What did you do? What did you say to him? I continued folding the few dresses I owned, my movements mechanical. I told him you cut my hair. Her hand cracked across my face, hard enough to snap my head sideways. I tasted blood. You think you've won something? She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. You think being chosen by that monster is a prize? He'll use you and discard you within a month. Everyone knows he destroys everything he touches. You'll be dead before winter, and I'll still be here, warm and comfortable, raising my daughter to be a proper lady. I pulled away from her grip and met her eyes. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her. Maybe I will be dead before winter, I said quietly, but at least I'll die somewhere you're not. The truth of it hung between us, that death in Frostholm was preferable to life in Shadowpine under her control. I watched that realization land, watched it wound her in a way my fear never had. Good. She left without another word, and I went back to packing. I didn't own much. A few dresses, mostly simple things in gray and brown. The books I'd managed to save from my mother, fairy tales and folk stories, their pages soft with age and reading. A wooden horse my father had carved for me before I was born, back when he still remembered how to love. I wrapped it carefully in a shawl and tucked it at the bottom of the trunk. There was a knock at my door. Soft, hesitant. Come in, Celestine. My stepsister entered like she was walking into a sick room. Her golden hair was still perfectly arranged, though her eyes were red-rimmed. She'd been crying. I'm sorry, she said, and to her credit, she seemed to mean it. About your hair. About everything. I should have said something. I should have stopped her. Yes, I agreed. You should have. She flinched. We'd never been friends. Exactly. But we'd existed in a careful détente, 2 prisoners in the same cell, pretending we weren't both trapped. Now even that thin connection was severing. He's going to kill you, Celestine whispered. Everyone says so. King Theron doesn't take mates, he takes victims. They say his last wife disappeared, and no one ever found her body. They say a lot of things. I closed the trunk with more force than necessary. Most of them are probably true. But I'm going anyway. You could refuse, you could claim illness, and then what? I turned to face her. Stay here? Marry whoever my father sells me to next season? Spend the rest of my life watching Marin destroy me piece by piece while you look away? I shook my head. At least with King Theron, it'll be quick. Celestine's face crumpled. Don't say that. Why not? It's the truth. I softened slightly, seeing her genuine distress. Look, maybe it won't be terrible. Maybe he just needs a political alliance. Maybe I'll live in some tower and read books and never see him at all. Maybe you should stop lying to yourself, she interrupted, her voice sharp with sudden anger. You're going to die, Vera, and you're acting like it doesn't matter, like you don't matter. The words hit harder than Marin's slap. I matter, I said quietly. I don't matter here. Not anymore. Maybe I never did. Before she could respond, there was a heavy knock at the door. One of King Theron's guards stood in the hallway, his expression impassive. Miss Ashford, it's time. Celestine grabbed my hand, squeezed it once hard, and then fled. I watched her go, this girl who'd shared my house but never quite my life, and felt something crack in my chest. Then I picked up my trunk and followed the guard downstairs. The grand hall had emptied quickly after the king's announcement. No one wanted to linger in the wake of such a shocking choice. Now only a few people remained. My father, looking ill, Lord Caldris, trying to manage the logistics, and King Theron's entourage, preparing to depart. The king himself stood near the main doors, speaking quietly with one of his advisors, a sharp-faced woman, with iron-gray hair and calculating eyes. He didn't look at me as I approached, didn't acknowledge me at all. My father intercepted me halfway across the hall. Vera. He reached for my arm, then seemed to think better of it. I need you to understand. This is an incredible honor for our family. King Theron's favor will elevate our standing beyond anything I could have. Don't, I said flatly. Don't pretend this is about honor. You sold me to Marin's cruelty for years. Now you're selling me to a king. At least be honest about what you are. His face went pale. I'm your father. No, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. You were my father. Now you're just the man who let them break me. I adjusted my grip on the trunk. Goodbye, Lord Ashford. I walked past him before he could respond, before I could see whether my words had landed or simply bounced off the armor of his self-delusion. King Theron's advisor, the gray-haired woman, stepped forward as I approached. Her eyes swept over me with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating livestock. I am Lady Kira, the king's chief counselor, she said briskly. You will address the king as Your Majesty or Sire. You will not speak unless spoken to during the journey. You will not attempt to escape or cause disruption. Do you understand? Yes. Lady Kira. Good. She gestured to one of the guards. Take her trunk. We're already behind schedule. The guard took my trunk with ease, and suddenly I had nothing to hold on to, nothing to occupy my hands. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I might simply blow away. King Theron finished his conversation and turned toward me. Those silver eyes swept over me once, categorizing, dismissing. Can you ride? Yes, Your Majesty. Then you'll ride. We don't use carriages in the north. He strode toward the doors without waiting for a response. Keep up or be left behind. And that was it. No ceremony. No formal goodbyes. No moment to breathe or process or prepare. I followed him out into the courtyard, where 24 horses waited, their breath steaming in the morning air. The king's horse was a massive black stallion with eyes like smoke. My horse was a smaller gray mare, already saddled, her reins held by one of the guards. I mounted without assistance. I'd learned to ride as a child, before my mother died and everything turned to ash. The guard raised an eyebrow, slightly impressed, then handed me the reins. King Theron swung onto his stallion with fluid grace, and the entire company turned north as one unit. No one said goodbye to me, no one waved. I looked back once at Shadowpine Keep, its towers dark against the morning sky, and felt nothing, just a hollow space where home should have been. Then we were riding, and there was no more time for looking back. The journey north was brutal. We rode for hours without stopping, the landscape gradually shifting from Shadowpine's gentle hills to rougher terrain. King Theron set a punishing pace, and I realized quickly that his comment about keeping up hadn't been a courtesy, it had been a warning. Anyone who couldn't maintain the speed would genuinely be abandoned. I kept up. My thighs burned, my back ached. My bare head was cold, despite the leather cap one of the guards had grudgingly tossed me, but I kept up, because the alternative was unthinkable. No one spoke to me. The guards rode in formation around the king, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. Lady Kira rode beside Theron, occasionally leaning in to murmur something that made him nod or frown. I rode near the back, just another piece of cargo being transported north. We stopped once, briefly, to water the horses at a stream. I dismounted on shaking legs, my muscles screaming in protest. I'd ridden before, but never like this, Never for hours at this pace. Lady Kira appeared beside me, holding out a water skin and a piece of dried meat. "Eat," she commanded. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse." I took the offerings, too tired to bristle at her tone. The water was cold and sweet. The meat was tough but edible. I chewed mechanically, watching King Theron on the other side of the clearing. He stood alone, as he seemed to always stand, his hand resting on his horse's neck, his eyes fixed on the northern horizon. Even at rest, he radiated tension, coiled violence waiting for an excuse. Why did he choose me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Lady Kira gave me a sharp look. "That is not your concern. I'm the one who's been chosen. I think it's very much my concern." For a moment, I thought she'd refuse to answer. Then she sighed, and something in her expression softened just barely. "King Theron does nothing without purpose," she said quietly. "If he chose you, there's a reason, whether that reason is good for you or not." She shrugged. "Time will tell." It was the least comforting thing anyone had ever said to me. We mounted again, and continued riding. By the time the sun began to set, I was barely staying upright in the saddle. Everything hurt. My hands were blistered from the reins. My legs had gone numb. My head pounded from dehydration and exhaustion, and the sheer overwhelming weight of everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. When King Theron finally raised a hand to signal a halt, I nearly wept with relief. We'd reached a clearing near another stream, sheltered by pine trees. The guards immediately began setting up camp with military efficiency tents appearing, fires being built, a perimeter being established. I slid off my horse and nearly collapsed, my legs refusing to hold my weight. A hand caught my elbow. I looked up into the silver eyes of King Theron. Up close, in the fading light, he looked almost human. Almost. The harsh lines of his face were softened by shadow, and when he steadied me, his grip was firm but not cruel. "You kept up," he said. It might have been approval. It might have been surprise. His tone gave nothing away. "You said to keep up or be left behind," I managed. "I'm not good at being left behind." Something flickered in his eyes. "No," he said slowly. "I don't imagine you are." He released me and turned away, and I was left standing there, confused and exhausted and utterly out of my depth. A guard showed me to a small tent mine, apparently with a bedroll and a lantern. He grunted something about dinner being ready soon and left. I collapsed onto the bedroll and stared at the canvas ceiling, my body screaming and my mind racing. What was I doing here? What had I agreed to? Why had he chosen me? The questions circled like carrion birds, picking at the edges of my sanity, but underneath the fear and confusion, something else stirred, something I hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. King Theron was a mystery, a walking contradiction, brutal but not unnecessarily cruel, powerful but not boastful. He'd chosen me for a reason, and despite everything, despite the danger, despite the fear, despite the absolute certainty that this would end badly, I wanted to know why. I wanted to understand the monster who'd looked at a bald, broken girl and seen something worth taking, even if understanding him killed me. Which, let's be honest, it probably would. But I'd survived this long by being curious, by finding stories in the darkness, by refusing to stop asking questions even when the answers were terrible. I wasn't going to stop now. Outside my tent, I could hear the guards talking in low voices. Someone laughed. Someone else cursed about the cold. Normal sounds. Human sounds. But underneath it all, I felt that strange pressure in the air that meant predator nearby. That weight of ancient power that radiated from King Theron like heat from coals. Tomorrow, we'd ride again. Tomorrow, I'd get closer to Frostholm, to whatever fate awaited me there. But tonight, I was alive. Exhausted, confused, possibly doomed but alive. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd expected to have. I closed my eyes and let exhaustion drag me under, into dreams of silver eyes and frozen kingdoms and questions that had no safe answers. Chapter 3. The Castle of Ice and Secrets. We reached Frostholm on the 5th day. I'd thought Shadowpine was cold. I'd been wrong. The north was a different kind of cold, The kind that crept into your bones and made a home there. The kind that turned your breath to ice crystals and made your eyelashes freeze together if you blinked too long. The landscape had transformed gradually over our journey, from forests to tundra, from green to endless white. And then, rising from the frozen wasteland like a crown of jagged ice, I saw it. Frostholm Castle. It wasn't beautiful. Beauty implied softness, warmth, something pleasing to the eye. Frostholm was magnificent in the way a glacier was. Magnificent, vast, ancient, utterly indifferent to whether you lived or died looking at it. The outer walls were pale stone that gleamed like pearl in the weak sunlight. Towers spiraled upward, their peaks lost in low clouds. Everything was sharp angles and defensive architecture, a fortress built by someone who expected to be attacked and wanted attackers to know they'd die trying. Impressive, isn't it? Lady Kira had ridden up beside me, her expression unreadable. King Theron's ancestors built it 4 centuries ago. It's never fallen. It looks like it doesn't want visitors, I said quietly. It doesn't. She gave me a sidelong glance. Neither does its king. I hope you understand what you've walked into, girl. I didn't walk into anything. I was chosen. A distinction without a difference. She urged her horse forward. Either way, you're here now. Try to survive it. The gates opened as we approached massive iron things that groaned like dying beasts. We rode through into a courtyard that could have held 100 soldiers, our horses' hooves echoing off stone. Guards lined the walls, their eyes tracking our movements with military precision. This wasn't a home. It was a war camp that happened to have walls. King Theron dismounted in one fluid motion and immediately began giving orders to his men. He still hadn't spoken to me beyond that one moment when I'd nearly collapsed. For 5 days, I'd been invisible to him, just another piece of baggage being transported north. Now, standing in his courtyard, watching him command his people with casual authority, I felt the full weight of my situation crash down on me. I was in a foreign kingdom, surrounded by warriors who owed me no loyalty. I had no allies, no resources, no way home even if I wanted to go back. And the man who'd brought me here, the king who'd chosen me for reasons I still didn't understand, looked at me with all the warmth of the frozen tundra beyond his walls. A different guard, younger than the others, with kind eyes approached and took my horse's reins. Miss Ashford, I'm Garrett. I'll show you to your chambers. Thank you. I dismounted, my legs still protesting after days of riding, and followed him. We entered the castle through a side door, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The interior was as cold as the exterior suggested, all stone and iron and minimal decoration. Torches burned in sconces along the walls, but they did little to warm the space. Our footsteps echoed in the empty corridors. Is it always this cold? I asked, pulling my cloak tighter. Garrett gave me a sympathetic look. You'll get used to it. Eventually, mostly. He didn't sound convinced. We climbed stairs, so many stairs, and walked down more corridors until I was completely lost. Finally, Garrett stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. These are your chambers, he said, pushing it open. Lady Kira will come by later to discuss. Expectations. His Majesty's chambers are in the North Tower. He paused. Quite far from here. I understood the implication. Whatever King Theron wanted from me, it wasn't proximity. Thank you, Garrett. He hesitated, then leaned in slightly. Miss Ashford Vera, if I may be careful, King Theron isn't. He's not like other men. He's been alone for so long that he's forgotten how to be anything else. Don't expect warmth from him. Don't expect kindness. Just don't expect anything. And you might survive this. Before I could respond, he left, his footsteps fading down the corridor. I turned to examine my new prison. The chambers were larger than my entire room in Shadowpine had been. A massive 4-poster bed dominated one wall, piled high with furs. A fireplace currently unlit took up another wall. There were 2 windows, narrow but tall, offering views of the frozen landscape beyond. A writing desk, a wardrobe, a door that presumably led to a bathing chamber. It was luxurious by any standard. It felt like a tomb. I walked to the window and pressed my hand against the cold glass. Beyond, I could see nothing but white snow and ice stretching to the horizon, broken only by occasional dark shapes that might have been rocks or trees or frozen corpses for all I knew. This was my life now. This cold, beautiful, terrible place. A knock at the door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. "Enter," I called, expecting Lady Kira, or perhaps a servant. King Theron walked in. I spun around, my heart suddenly in my throat. He seemed larger in the enclosed space, more dangerous. He'd removed his traveling furs and now wore simple black clothing that somehow made him look more intimidating, not less. His silver eyes swept the room once before landing on me. "Adequate?" he asked. "Yes, Your Majesty. More than adequate. Thank you." He made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. Then he just stood there, studying me with that same clinical interest he'd shown at the ceremony. Like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. The silence stretched. "Why did you choose me?" The question burst out before I could stop it. "At the ceremony." "Why me?" His expression didn't change. "You want the truth?" "Yes, because you had nothing to lose." He said it simply, like he was commenting on the weather. Every other girl in that hall was hoping to gain something: status, security, a good match. You were the only one who looked like survival was the only victory you cared about. He tilted his head slightly. "I respect that. You respect survival? I respect people who understand what it costs." He moved toward the fireplace and began building a fire with efficient, practiced movements. "Most people think survival is simple, just keep breathing and you've won. But you know better. You know that sometimes survival means cutting away everything beautiful about yourself. Sometimes it means becoming something you hate. Sometimes it means standing in a hall full of people who despise you and refusing to disappear." The fire caught, warm light spilling into the room. He stood, brushing off his hands. "I chose you because you're already broken," he continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "Which means I can't break you further. And you chose to survive your stepmother's cruelty, which means you're stronger than you look." He turned those silver eyes on me. "I need someone strong, Vera Ashford. I need someone who won't shatter the first time I show them what I really am." My mouth had gone dry. "And what are you, Your Majesty?" Something flickered in his expression, something dark and old and infinitely sad. "A monster," he said quietly. "Just one that's learned to wear a crown." He walked toward the door, then paused. "Dinner is at sunset. Someone will come fetch you. Don't wander the castle alone, it's easy to get lost, and some areas are dangerous." He glanced back at me. "Rest. You look exhausted." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone with a crackling fire and more questions than I'd started with. I didn't rest. Instead, I explored my chambers thoroughly, opening every drawer, examining every corner, trying to understand this space that was now mine. The wardrobe held clothing dresses in dark, practical colors, all sized for me. Someone had prepared for my arrival. Someone had cared enough to ensure I'd have what I needed. The bathing chamber held a copper tub large enough to drown in, and a mirror. I avoided the mirror. By the time a servant came to fetch me for dinner, I'd changed into one of the dark dresses, a deep blue thing that was warm and surprisingly well made, and attempted to make myself presentable. Without hair, my options were limited. I settled for washing my face and trying not to think about how exposed I felt. The servant, a middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair and weary eyes, led me through more corridors, down more stairs, until we reached a dining hall that could have seated 50 people but currently held only one. King Theron sat at the head of a long table, a single-place setting before him, candlelight casting shadows across his harsh features. He looked up as I entered. "Vera." He gestured to the seat at his right hand. Not across from him, beside him. "Close. Sit." I sat, hyper-aware of his proximity, of the way the candlelight caught the silver in his hair, of the sheer physical presence of him. Servants brought food: roasted meat, root vegetables, dark bread, simple fare, but well prepared and plentiful. I ate because I was hungry, not because I tasted anything. "You'll dine with me every evening," Theron said abruptly. "It's expected." Expected by whom? By everyone. You're here as my chosen mate. That means we must present a certain image. An image of what? We barely know each other. He cut into his meat with precise movements. We know enough. You know I'm dangerous. I know you're resilient. That's more than most marriages start with. This is a marriage? Eventually, there will be a ceremony once the moon turns. Until then, you're... He paused, searching for the right word. A guest. A prisoner, you mean? His lips twitched. It might have been amusement, if you prefer that terminology. I set down my fork and turned to face him fully. Your Majesty, I need to understand what you want from me. You've brought me to this frozen castle, given me beautiful chambers, and now you're feeding me and talking about marriage. But you've also called yourself a monster and implied I'm here because I'm already broken. What do you actually want? He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those ancient silver eyes. I want, he said slowly, for you to answer a riddle. I blinked. A riddle? Yes. He leaned back in his chair. If you answer correctly, I'll tell you the truth about why you're really here. If you answer incorrectly. He shrugged. We'll try again tomorrow night, and the night after, for as long as it takes. This was insane, all of it. But something in his expression told me this mattered, that this riddle was more than just a game. All right, I said, ask your riddle. King Theron's eyes glinted in the candlelight. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. I am given but never taken. I can be broken but never mended. I bind tighter than chains but weigh nothing at all. I am more precious than gold to some, and worthless as dirt to others. What am I? I stared at him, my mind racing through possibilities. A vow? No, vows could be taken. Trust? Maybe, but trust could be rebuilt. Love? Too simple. He wouldn't ask something so obvious. Can I have time to think about it? I asked. You have until tomorrow night. He returned to his meal. We'll dine again, and you can give me your answer. The rest of dinner passed in relative silence. He asked me simple questions. How was the journey? Were my chambers comfortable? Was I adjusting to the cold? I answered carefully, still trying to understand this strange man who'd chosen me for reasons that made no sense. When the meal ended, he stood. Garrett will escort you back to your chambers. Sleep well, Vera. Your Majesty, I said as he turned to leave. Can I ask you something? You may ask. I may not answer. Do you actually want me here? Or am I just another political necessity? He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I don't do things I don't want to do, he said finally. Remember that. Then he was gone, and I was left with a riddle, a belly full of food, and the growing suspicion that I'd stepped into a story far more complicated than I'd imagined. Garrett appeared to escort me back. As we walked through the cold corridors, I turned the riddle over in my mind. I am given, but never taken. I can be broken, but never mended. What bound people? What was precious to some and worthless to others? And why did King Theron need me to answer it? I fell asleep that night with the riddle echoing in my mind, and dreamed of silver eyes and frozen kingdoms and promises that couldn't be kept. Chapter 3. The Castle of Ice and Secrets. We reached Frostholm on the 5th day. I'd thought Shadowpine was cold. I'd been wrong. The north was a different kind of cold. The kind that crept into your bones and made a home there. The kind that turned your breath to ice crystals and made your eyelashes freeze together if you blinked too long. The landscape had transformed gradually over our journey, from forests to tundra, from green to endless white. And then, rising from the frozen wasteland like a crown of jagged ice, I saw it. Frostholm Castle. It wasn't beautiful. Beauty implied softness, warmth, something pleasing to the eye. Frostholm was magnificent in the way a glacier was magnificent, vast, ancient, utterly indifferent to whether you lived or died looking at it. The outer walls were pale stone that gleamed like pearl in the weak sunlight. Towers spiraled upward, their peaks lost in low clouds. Everything was sharp angles and defensive architecture, a fortress built by someone who expected to be attacked and wanted attackers to know they'd die trying. Impressive, isn't it? Lady Kira had ridden up beside me, her expression unreadable. King Theron's ancestors built it 4 centuries ago. It's never fallen. It looks like it doesn't want visitors, I said quietly. It doesn't. She gave me a sidelong glance. Neither does its king. I hope you understand what you've walked into, girl. I didn't walk into anything. I was chosen. A distinction without a difference. She urged her horse forward. Either way, you're here now. Try to survive it. The gates opened as we approached massive iron things that groaned like dying beasts. We rode through into a courtyard that could have held 100 soldiers, our horses' hooves echoing off stone. Guards lined the walls, their eyes tracking our movements with military precision. This wasn't a home. It was a war camp that happened to have walls. King Theron dismounted in one fluid motion and immediately began giving orders to his men. He still hadn't spoken to me beyond that one moment when I'd nearly collapsed. For 5 days, I'd been invisible to him, just another piece of baggage being transported north. Now, standing in his courtyard, watching him command his people with casual authority, I felt the full weight of my situation crash down on me. I was in a foreign kingdom, surrounded by warriors who owed me no loyalty. I had no allies, no resources, no way home even if I wanted to go back. And the man who'd brought me here, the king who'd chosen me for reasons I still didn't understand, looked at me with all the warmth of the frozen tundra beyond his walls. A different guard, younger than the others, with kind eyes approached and took my horse's reins. Miss Ashford? I'm Garrett. I'll show you to your chambers. Thank you. I dismounted, my legs still protesting after days of riding, and followed him. We entered the castle through a side door, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The interior was as cold as the exterior suggested, all stone and iron and minimal decoration. Torches burned in sconces along the walls, but they did little to warm the space. Our footsteps echoed in the empty corridors. Is it always this cold? I asked, pulling my cloak tighter. Garrett gave me a sympathetic look. You'll get used to it, eventually, mostly. He didn't sound convinced. We climbed stairs, so many stairs, and walked down more corridors until I was completely lost. Finally, Garrett stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. These are your chambers, he said, pushing it open. Lady Kira will come by later to discuss expectations. His Majesty's chambers are in the North Tower. He paused. Quite far from here. I understood the implication. Whatever King Theron wanted from me, it wasn't proximity. Thank you, Garrett. He hesitated, then leaned in slightly. Miss Ashford Vera, if I may be careful, King Theron isn't. He's not like other men. He's been alone for so long that he's forgotten how to be anything else. Don't expect warmth from him. Don't expect kindness. Just don't expect anything, and you might survive this. Before I could respond, he left, his footsteps fading down the corridor. I turned to examine my new prison. The chambers were larger than my entire room in Shadowpine had been. A massive 4-poster bed dominated one wall, piled high with furs. A fireplace currently unlit took up another wall. There were 2 windows, narrow but tall, offering views of the frozen landscape beyond. A writing desk. A wardrobe. A door that presumably led to a bathing chamber. It was luxurious by any standard. It felt like a tomb. I walked to the window and pressed my hand against the cold glass. Beyond, I could see nothing but white snow and ice stretching to the horizon, broken only by occasional dark shapes that might have been rocks or trees or frozen corpses for all I knew. This was my life now. This cold, beautiful, terrible place. A knock at the door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Enter, I called, expecting Lady Kira or perhaps a servant. King Theron walked in. I spun around, my heart suddenly in my throat. He seemed larger in the enclosed space, more dangerous. He'd removed his traveling furs and now wore simple black clothing that somehow made him look more intimidating, not less. His silver eyes swept the room once before landing on me. Adequate? He asked. Yes, Your Majesty. More than adequate. Thank you. He made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. Then he just stood there, studying me with that same clinical interest he'd shown at the ceremony. Like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. The silence stretched. Why did you choose me? The question burst out before I could stop it. At the ceremony. Why me? His expression didn't change. You want the truth? Yes, because you had nothing to lose. He said it simply, like he was commenting on the weather. Every other girl in that hall was hoping to gain something: status, security, a good match. You were the only one who looked like survival was the only victory you cared about. He tilted his head slightly. I respect that. You respect survival? I respect people who understand what it costs. He moved toward the fireplace and began building a fire with efficient, practiced movements. Most people think survival is simple, just keep breathing and you've won. But you know better. You know that sometimes survival means cutting away everything beautiful about yourself. Sometimes it means becoming something you hate. Sometimes it means standing in a hall full of people who despise you and refusing to disappear. The fire caught, warm light spilling into the room. He stood, brushing off his hands. I chose you because you're already broken, he continued, his tone matter of fact. Which means I can't break you further. And you chose to survive your stepmother's cruelty, which means you're stronger than you look. He turned those silver eyes on me. I need someone strong. Vera Ashford. I need someone who won't shatter the first time I show them what I really am. My mouth had gone dry. And what are you, Your Majesty? Something flickered in his expression, something dark and old and infinitely sad. A monster, he said quietly. Just one that's learned to wear a crown. He walked toward the door, then paused. Dinner is at sunset. Someone will come fetch you. Don't wander the castle alone, it's easy to get lost, and some areas are dangerous. He glanced back at me. Rest. You look exhausted. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone with a crackling fire and more questions than I'd started with. I didn't rest. Instead, I explored my chambers thoroughly, opening every drawer, examining every corner, trying to understand this space that was now mine. The wardrobe held clothing dresses in dark, practical colors, all sized for me. Someone had prepared for my arrival. Someone had cared enough to ensure I'd have what I needed. The bathing chamber held a copper tub large enough to drown in, and a mirror. I avoided the mirror. By the time a servant came to fetch me for dinner, I'd changed into one of the dark dresses, a deep blue thing that was warm and surprisingly well made, and attempted to make myself presentable. Without hair, my options were limited. I settled for washing my face and trying not to think about how exposed I felt. The servant, a middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair and weary eyes, led me through more corridors, down more stairs, until we reached a dining hall that could have seated 50 people but currently held only one. King Theron sat at the head of a long table, a single place setting before him, candlelight casting shadows across his harsh features. He looked up as I entered. Vera. He gestured to the seat at his right hand, not across from him, beside him, close. Sit. Tit. I sat, hyper-aware of his proximity, of the way the candlelight caught the silver in his hair, of the sheer physical presence of him. Servants brought food, roasted meat, root vegetables, dark bread, simple fare, but well-prepared and plentiful. I ate because I was hungry, not because I tasted anything. You'll dine with me every evening, Theron said abruptly. It's expected. Expected by whom? By everyone. You're here as my chosen mate. That means we must present a certain image. An image of what? We barely know each other. He cut into his meat with precise movements. We know enough. You know I'm dangerous. I know you're resilient. That's more than most marriages start with. This is a marriage? Eventually. There will be a ceremony once the moon turns. Until then. He paused, searching for the right word. A guest. A prisoner, you mean? His lips twitched. It might have been amusement, if you prefer that terminology. I set down my fork and turned to face him fully. Your Majesty, I need to understand what you want from me. You've brought me to this frozen castle, given me beautiful chambers, and now you're feeding me and talking about marriage. But you've also called yourself a monster and implied, I'm here because I'm already broken. What do you actually want? He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those ancient silver eyes. I want, he said slowly, for you to answer a riddle. I blinked. A riddle? Yes. He leaned back in his chair. If you answer correctly, I'll tell you the truth about why you're really here. If you answer incorrectly." He shrugged. "We'll try again tomorrow night, and the night after. For as long as it takes." This was insane. All of it. But something in his expression told me this mattered, that this riddle was more than just a game. "All right," I said. "Ask your riddle." King Theron's eyes glinted in the candlelight. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "I am given but never taken. I can be broken but never mended. I bind tighter than chains but weigh nothing at all. I am more precious than gold to some, and worthless as dirt to others. What am I?" I stared at him, my mind racing through possibilities. A vow? No, vows could be taken. Trust? Maybe, but trust could be rebuilt. Love? Too simple. He wouldn't ask something so obvious. "Can I have time to think about it?" I asked. "You have until tomorrow night." He returned to his meal. "We'll dine again, and you can give me your answer." The rest of dinner passed in relative silence. He asked me simple questions. How was the journey? Were my chambers comfortable? Was I adjusting to the cold? I answered carefully, still trying to understand this strange man who'd chosen me for reasons that made no sense. When the meal ended, he stood. "Garrett will escort you back to your chambers. Sleep well, Vera." "Your Majesty," I said as he turned to leave. "Can I ask you something?" "You may ask. I may not answer." "Do you actually want me here? Or am I just another political necessity?" He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I don't do things I don't want to do," he said finally. "Remember that." Then he was gone, and I was left with a riddle, a belly full of food, and the growing suspicion that I'd stepped into a story far more complicated than I'd imagined. Garrett appeared to escort me back. As we walked through the cold corridors, I turned the riddle over in my mind. I am given but never taken. I can be broken but never mended. What bound people? What was precious to some and worthless to others? And why did King Theron need me to answer it? I fell asleep that night with the riddle echoing in my mind, and dreamed of silver eyes and frozen kingdoms and promises that couldn't be kept. Chapter 4. Conversations in the Dark. I spent the next day alone. No one came to my chambers, except a silent servant who brought breakfast porridge with honey and dried fruit and took away the empty dishes. No one summoned me, no one checked on me. I was simply left. At first, I didn't mind. After 5 days of brutal riding and constant vigilance, the solitude felt like a gift. I slept late, soaked in a hot bath until my skin turned pink, and explored every corner of my chambers with the thoroughness of someone who had nothing but time. But by afternoon, the silence started to press in on me. I'd spent years in Shadowpine finding corners to hide in, teaching myself to become invisible. But this wasn't hiding, this was erasure. The castle was massive. I could hear distant sounds of life voices, footsteps, doors closing, but none of it touched me. I was a ghost haunting rooms that weren't mine, in a life I didn't understand. And always, the riddle circled through my mind. I am given but never taken. I can be broken but never mended. I bind tighter than chains but weigh nothing at all. I paced my chambers, muttering possibilities under my breath. A heart? No, hearts could heal. Faith? Closer, but faith could be taken away. Hope? Maybe, but hope felt too abstract, and King Theron didn't seem like a man who dealt in abstractions. By the time sunset approached, I was restless and half mad with my own thoughts. Garrett came to escort me to dinner exactly as the light began to fade. He gave me an encouraging smile that made me want to either hug him or shake him. "Any luck with the riddle?" he asked as we walked. I shot him a surprised look. "You know about it?" "Everyone knows. His Majesty tells a riddle to every guest." He seemed to choose the word carefully. "It's tradition. Has anyone ever answered correctly?" His silence was answer enough. We reached the dining hall, and once again, King Theron sat alone at the head of the table, candlelight painting shadows across his harsh features. But tonight, something was different. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes were deeper, and his shoulders carried a weight that hadn't been visible yesterday. "Vera," he gestured to the same seat beside him. I trust you spent the day comfortably? I spent it alone, I said, sitting. Is that comfortable or simply convenient for you? His lips twitched, almost a smile. Direct. I appreciate that. He poured wine into my glass with his own hands, a strangely intimate gesture. You're alone because I haven't decided what to do with you yet. I'm not an object to be done with. No, he agreed. You're a problem to be solved. Servants brought fish tonight, with roasted vegetables and fresh bread that steamed when broken open. We ate in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. Have you considered my riddle? I've thought of little else. I set down my fork. But I need more information. Is this something tangible or abstract? Abstract. Something everyone has or something rare? That depends on the person. His silver eyes studied me. Some people have an abundance. Others have none at all. I chewed my lip, thinking, can it be restored once broken? No. Once broken, it's destroyed forever. You can build something new in its place, but the original is gone. That eliminated several possibilities. I was left with trust, innocence, faith, a promise, I said suddenly. The answer is a promise. King Theron went very still. His hand, reaching for his wine glass, froze mid-motion. When he looked at me, something blazed in those silver eyes, surprise, maybe, or recognition. Explain, he said softly. A promise is given freely but can't be taken by force. Once broken, it can never be truly mended. You can apologize, you can make a new promise, but the original one is destroyed forever. It binds people tighter than any chain, because it's built on choice and trust, and it's precious to those who value their word, but worthless to liars who make promises they never intended to keep. I met his gaze steadily. Did I answer correctly? For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair, and something that might have been respect crossed his features. Yes, he said. You answered correctly. I waited, but he didn't continue. Well? You said you'd tell me the truth if I answered. Why am I really here? He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against stone. For a moment, I thought he'd simply leave, breaking his own promise, but instead, he walked to the window, his back to me, his hands clasped behind him. I am cursed, he said finally, his voice low. Have been for nearly 2 centuries. I blinked. Whatever I'd expected. It wasn't that. Cursed how? I cannot die. He said it flatly, without emotion. I've tried, believe me. Blade, poison, fire, nothing works. I heal from everything. Age stopped touching me when I was 35, and I've been 35 for 200 years. He turned to face me. Do you understand what that means? That you're immortal? That I'm trapped. His voice carried an edge of something raw. I've watched everyone I've ever cared about grow old and die. My wife, my children, my friends, every advisor, every soldier, every servant, they all leave eventually. And I remain, frozen, unable to follow them into death. The pain in his voice was so unexpected, so genuine, that I found myself standing without meaning to. The curse was laid by a witch I wronged in my youth, he continued. She was specific about its terms. I would live forever, alone, unless I could find someone who loved both sides of me, the king and the beast. Beast? I echoed. You mentioned that before. What do you mean? His jaw tightened. Every night, when the moon rises, I transform. Not into a wolf, our kind can shift into wolves at will. This is different. This is punishment. I become something else. Something monstrous. And in that form, I'm more animal than man, violent, dangerous. He met my eyes. That's why my chambers are so far from yours, why I spend my nights locked away. I'm not safe when the moon rises. My mind raced, trying to process this. And you think I can break this curse? I don't think anything. His laugh was bitter. I've given up thinking. For 2 centuries, I've watched women come and go. They love the king, the power, the crown, the prestige. Or they love the beast, the danger, the wildness, the fantasy of taming something feral, but never both. Always one or the other, and that's not enough to break the curse. So why choose me? Because you answered the riddle. He moved closer, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of 2 centuries of loneliness. Do you know how many people I've posed that question to? Hundreds, maybe thousands. And not one of them understood what I was really asking. They guessed words, concepts, pretty ideas. But you. He stopped just in front of me. You understood that I was asking about the foundation of everything. About what matters when nothing else does. A promise, I whispered. A promise. He agreed. The witch cursed me to live without one. No one can promise to love me. Love can't be promised. It can only be given freely. But someone who understands what promises mean, who values them, who knows their weight. He trailed off. That's the kind of person who might see past the curse to whatever's underneath. I stood there, drowning in the implications. He hadn't chosen me because I was beautiful or powerful or well-connected. He'd chosen me because he thought I understood something fundamental about commitment and truth. He was wrong, of course. I'd been broken by broken promises my whole life. My father's promise to protect me. My stepmother's promises of fairness. Every promise in my life had shattered like glass, and I'd learned to build my survival on never believing them again. But I couldn't tell him that. Not when he was looking at me with something like hope in those ancient eyes. I don't know if I can help you, I said honestly. I don't know if I'm what you think I am. I don't expect you to love me, he said quietly. I don't expect you to break the curse. He looked away. I'm tired, Vera. So tired of being alone. And you looked at me in that hall and didn't flinch. Even with everything you'd been through, even humiliated and hurting, you didn't look away. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I just wanted someone who could look at me without flinching, even if only for a little while. The honesty of it stole my breath. This king, this ancient immortal who commanded armies and crushed rebellions, was asking for the smallest thing imaginable just to be seen. Not worshipped, not feared, not obeyed, just seen. I understood that hunger, had felt it every day in Shadowpine, watching people's eyes slide past me like I was furniture. Being invisible was its own kind of death. I can do that, I heard myself say. I can look at you without flinching. Something in his expression shifted, softened, just fractionally. Thank you, he said. We returned to the table, but the meal had changed. The silence between us felt different now, less like strangers, and more like 2 people who'd accidentally told each other the truth. Tell me about your wife, I said impulsively. Your first wife. He looked surprised, then thoughtful. Alara. Her name was Alara. A sad smile touched his lips. She was fierce. Brilliant. Argued with me about everything. We were happy, for a time, before the curse. What happened to her? The same thing that happens to everyone I care about. She grew old. She died. I remained. He turned his wineglass in his hands, watching the candlelight refract through the liquid. She knew about the curse, tried everything to break it. But in the end, she grew to resent me for staying young while she faded. Grew to hate that I couldn't die with her. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was 200 years ago. The grief has dulled to something bearable. He glanced at me. Tell me about your mother. So I did. I told him about her laugh, about how she used to braid my hair and tell me stories, how she died slowly, illness eating her from the inside, and how my father had broken with her passing, how Marin had arrived within a year, stepping into my mother's place like she'd been waiting for the position to open up. He listened without interrupting, without offering empty platitudes. Just listened. Your stepmother is a fool, he said when I finished. Cutting your hair like that, she gave you armor, not a weakness. I touched my bare head self-consciously. How is this armor? Because now everyone who looks at you sees someone who's survived, someone who's been tested and remained standing. Hair grows back. But courage? He shook his head. That's rare, and you wear it like a crown. Something warm bloomed in my chest. No one had ever said anything like that to me. No one had ever looked at my baldness and seen strength instead of shame. Thank you, I whispered. We talked late into the night. About books. He had a library, he said, vast and ancient, filled with texts from kingdoms that no longer existed, about the north harsh and beautiful and unforgiving, about loneliness and survival, and the stories we told ourselves to make it through the dark. It was the most honest conversation I'd ever had. Finally, reluctantly, he stood. "It's late. And the moon will rise soon." I glanced at the window. The sky had turned deep indigo, stars beginning to emerge. "What happens when you transform?" I asked. "Does it hurt?" "Yes." He said it simply. "But I'm used to pain. It's the loss of control I hate more. The way the beast thinks. The way it hunts." He shook his head. "I'll see you tomorrow night. Same time. Will you tell me more? About the curse? About your life?" He paused at the door, looking back. "If you want to hear it. Most people don't. The truth is too heavy." "I want to hear it," I said firmly. "All of it." Something like gratitude flickered in his eyes. "Then I'll tell you. Tomorrow." He left, and Garrett appeared to escort me back to my chambers. As we walked through the cold corridors, I realized something had shifted. I'd arrived at Frostholm expecting to be a prisoner or a pawn. Instead, I was becoming something far more dangerous. A confidant. Someone who knew the king's secrets. Someone who was beginning to care whether he suffered. Back in my chambers, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the castle settle around me. Somewhere far away, King Theron was transforming into whatever beast the curse had made him. Somewhere, he was hurting and alone. And for the first time since arriving, I wished I could help him. Not because I was falling in love, nothing so dramatic, but because I recognized pain when I saw it. Because loneliness called to loneliness. Because he'd looked at my bare head and seen strength. And that gift deserved to be repaid. I fell asleep thinking about promises and curses and kings who couldn't die. And I dreamed of silver eyes in the darkness, watching me with something that might have been hope. Chapter 5. The next 3 weeks passed in a rhythm I hadn't expected, something almost like peace. Every day, I woke alone. A servant brought breakfast. I read, explored my chambers, sometimes stood at the window watching snow fall over the frozen landscape. The loneliness should have been unbearable, but after years of navigating Marin's cruelty, the solitude felt like healing. And every evening, I dined with King Theron. Our conversations became the axis my world turned on. He told me about his curse in careful pieces, like he was afraid too much truth at once would send me running. How the witch, a healer named Morgessa, had loved him once, before he'd betrayed her for political advantage. How she'd cursed him not out of malice, but heartbreak. "You'll live forever," she'd told him, "until you learn what it means to be truly seen." She wanted me to understand what I'd destroyed, he said one night, his voice quiet. "A promise. Our promise. I broke it for a crown, and she made sure I'd spend eternity paying for it." "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Every day for 200 years. He looked at me then, and the rawness in his eyes made my chest ache. "Does that satisfy you?" "It's not about satisfaction. It's about understanding." I pushed food around my plate. "You're not the monster you think you are. A real monster wouldn't regret anything. You haven't seen me transform." "Call." "No," I agreed, "but I've seen you, and that counts for something." He studied me across the candlelight, and something in his expression softened. "You're remarkably stubborn, you know that?" "I've been told." Our conversations wandered through centuries of history. He told me about wars I'd only read about in books, about kingdoms that had risen and fallen while he watched, about the loneliness of outliving everyone, about forgetting what it felt like to hope for anything. And I told him about Shadowpine, about my mother's death and my father's retreat into cowardice, about Marin's systematic destruction of everything I valued, about Celestine's well-meaning but useless sympathy, about learning to survive by becoming invisible. "You were never invisible," he said one night. "Overlooked maybe, deliberately ignored, but never invisible. People saw you. They just chose to look away. What's the difference? Being invisible means you don't matter. Being overlooked means they were afraid you mattered too much." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. On the 18th night, everything changed. We'd just finished dinner venison and winter vegetables when Theron stood and gestured toward the door. "Come with me. I want to show you something." I followed him through corridors I'd never seen before, deeper into the castle, until we reached a set of carved wooden doors that looked ancient. He produced a key from his pocket and unlocked them with a soft click. "I thought about what you said," he murmured, pushing the doors open. "About stories. About how you survived by disappearing into them." The doors swung wide, and I stepped into paradise. The library was enormous, 3 stories tall, with galleries circling the space and a domed ceiling painted with constellations. Shelves stretched in every direction, stuffed with books in leather bindings, some so old the titles had faded to ghosts. The smell hit me first: aged paper, leather, dust, and something else. Magic, maybe. Or just the accumulated weight of centuries of knowledge. I walked forward in a daze, my hand trailing along spines, my breath catching. "This is yours," Theron finished quietly. "If you want it. No one uses this space anymore. My scholars are long dead, and I've read everything here at least twice. But you." He moved beside me, and I could feel the warmth of him even through the cold air. "You look at books the way other people look at gold. So, it's yours." I turned to face him, and whatever he saw in my expression made him smile, a real smile, not the careful half measures he usually allowed himself. "Why?" I whispered. "Because you answered the riddle. Because you don't flinch when you look at me. Because—" He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched my bare head, the first time anyone had touched it since Marin had cut my hair. His hand was warm and careful. "Because I want you to have something beautiful in this frozen place, even if it's just words on pages." Tears burned in my eyes, I couldn't help it. In 18 days, this ancient, cursed king had given me more genuine kindness than my own family had in 18 years. "Thank you," I managed. "Theron, thank you." He went still at the sound of his name. I'd never used it before. Had always maintained the formal distance of "Your Majesty" or "Sire." But in that moment, surrounded by books and kindness, formality felt like a lie. "Theron," I said again, tasting the shape of it. "Is it all right if I call you that? When we're alone?" "Yes." His voice was rough. "Yes, you can call me that." We stood there in the library, something fragile and new stretching between us. Not love, not yet, but the foundation that love might build on, if given time, trust, recognition. The slow unfurling of 2 people who'd been alone so long they'd forgotten what companionship felt like. Then he stepped back, the moment breaking. "The moon will rise soon. I need to go. Can I ask you something first?" He tensed. "What?" "The transformation. Can anyone see it? Or do you lock yourself away?" "I lock myself away," he said flatly, "in chambers deep below the castle. No one sees. No one should see." "Why not?" "Because it's not safe. Because I'm not myself when it happens. Because—" he cut himself off, jaw tight. "Because I don't want you to see me that way." "What if I did?" The words spilled out before I could stop them. "What if I wanted to see all of you? King and beast both?" His eyes widened, something almost like fear flickering there. "No, absolutely not." "Why?" "Because you'd hate me." He said it with such certainty, such old pain, that my heart cracked. "Everyone who's seen the beast has either run in terror or tried to kill me. I won't risk that. Not with you. I wouldn't. You don't know what you'd do. No one knows until they see it." He was already backing toward the door. "Enjoy the library, Vera. I'll see you tomorrow night." He was gone before I could argue, the doors closing with a soft thud. I stood alone among the books, frustration and concern warring in my chest. He'd given me this beautiful gift, shown me genuine vulnerability, and then fled the moment I tried to reciprocate. But I understood, in a bone-deep way. He was afraid. After 2 centuries of rejection, of being seen as monster first and man second, he was terrified that I'd look at him the same way. He didn't understand that I was already broken enough not to care about monsters. I'd been raised by one, after all. I spent the next several days in the library, devouring books like a starving woman at a feast. History texts and poetry collections, folk tales from kingdoms I'd never heard of, philosophical treatises that made my brain hurt in the best way. I found books in languages I couldn't read, and sat with them anyway, running my fingers over foreign alphabets and imagining the stories they held. Garrett checked on me periodically, bringing food and stoking the fire that now burned constantly in the library's massive hearth. "You look happy," he observed one afternoon, setting down a tray of bread and cheese. "I am," I realized. "Is that strange? That you're happy in a cursed castle in the frozen north, married to an immortal king who transforms into a beast every night?" He pretended to consider. "No, not strange at all." I threw a cushion at him, and he laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made the cold library feel less lonely. "He's not so bad," I said quietly. "Theron, he's lonely. Sad. But not bad." Garrett's expression sobered. "No, he's not bad. He's just been hurt so many times he's forgotten how to hope for better." He paused. "You're good for him, you know. I haven't seen him smile in years, not a real smile, but when he talks about you." He shook his head. "Just don't give up on him. Even when he pushes you away." "I won't." But that night, at dinner, Theron did exactly that, pushed me away. He was distant from the moment I arrived, his responses clipped, his eyes avoiding mine. The easy conversation we'd built over weeks felt suddenly like pulling teeth. "Did I do something wrong?" I finally asked, setting down my fork. "No." "Then why are you acting like I'm a stranger?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "I made a mistake. Giving you the library, letting you call me by my name, it was a mistake. I let myself forget what this is." "And what is this?" "A transaction. I chose you to break a curse. You're here because you had nowhere else to go. That's all this is. That's all it can be." The words hit like physical blows. "You don't believe that, don't I?" He finally looked at me, and his eyes were cold, deliberately cold, like he was forcing himself to feel nothing. "I'm 200 years old, Vera. I've had this conversation before. I've let myself care before. And it always ends the same way with me alone, and them dead or gone. So forgive me if I'd like to avoid that particular pain this time." "So you're just going to—" "What? Keep me at arm's length forever?" "If it keeps me from getting attached." He stood. "Finish your meal. I have business to attend to." "Theron, Your Majesty," he corrected sharply. "Address me properly." He left, and I sat there in the empty dining hall, fury and hurt churning in my stomach. How dare he? How dare he give me a library and his name and pieces of his heart, and then snatch them back like they'd never existed? How dare he decide for both of us that caring was too dangerous? I stormed back to my chambers and paced like a caged animal. This was his fear talking, I understood that, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. An idea formed, reckless, and probably stupid. If he wouldn't let me see the beast by choice, I'd have to see it without permission. I waited until full dark, until the castle had gone quiet. Then I slipped out of my chambers, a stolen candle in hand, and began searching. The castle was a maze, but I'd paid attention during my escorts to and from dinner. I knew the general direction of the lower levels. I just had to find the stairs leading down. It took an hour of wrong turns and dead ends before I found them, a narrow stone staircase spiraling into darkness, blocked by an iron gate. Locked, of course, but the lock was old, and I'd learned some useful skills surviving Shadowpine. A hairpin would have been ideal, but I improvised with a thin piece of metal from a wall sconce. After several minutes of fumbling, the lock clicked open. I descended into the bowels of the castle. The air grew colder as I went down. Damper. The walls wept with moisture, and my candle flame flickered dangerously. I heard sounds echoing up from below, scraping, growling, something between animal and anguish. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was insane. Suicidal, probably, but I needed to see, needed to understand what he was so afraid of me witnessing. The stairs opened into a corridor lined with cells, old dungeons, unused for who knows how long. All of them empty, except one at the very end. I approached slowly, my candle held high, and I saw him, the beast. He was massive, easily 8 feet tall, built like something from nightmares. His body was covered in midnight black fur that seemed to absorb light, His hands ended in claws as long as daggers. His face was a horrifying fusion of wolf and man, with silver eyes that burned with an intelligence that was both human and utterly alien. He prowled the cell like a trapped animal, and when he caught my scent, his head snapped toward me. We stared at each other through the bars. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee. This was death in a beautiful shape. This was the monster from children's stories. This was Theron, I whispered. The beast went utterly still. Those silver eyes, his eyes, I realized, the same color, the same depth fixed on me with an intensity that stole my breath. He moved closer to the bars, slow and cautious, like he expected me to bolt. I didn't bolt. I'm not afraid of you, I said, though my hands shook. I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. A low sound rumbled from his chest, not a growl. Something else. Something almost like wonder? I stepped closer, until only the bars separated us. Up close, he was even more terrifying. Even more magnificent. They told me you were a monster, I continued softly, but they called me worthless, so I don't trust their judgment much. I reached up, slowly, and placed my hand against the bars. I see you, Theron. King and beast, and I'm still here. The beast reached out so carefully, like he was afraid of breaking me, and touched one massive claw to my fingers through the bars. The contact sent a shock through my entire system. For a long moment, we stayed like that. Girl and beast, human and monster. Two broken things, recognizing each other in the dark. Then footsteps echoed down the corridor, Garrett's voice calling my name, panicked. I have to go, I whispered. But I'll come back, I promise. The beast made a sound loss and longing wrapped together. I fled back up the stairs, meeting Garrett halfway. He grabbed my shoulders, eyes wild with fear. Are you insane? He hissed. If he'd hurt you, he didn't hurt me. I met his gaze steadily. And he won't. I know that now. Garrett stared at me like I'd grown a second head. What happened down there? I saw him, I said simply. I saw all of him. And I'm still here. I returned to my chambers and lay in bed, my heart still racing, my hand tingling where the beast had touched it. Tomorrow, I'd have to face Theron's fury. He'd be angry that I'd disobeyed, that I'd endangered myself, that I'd seen what he desperately wanted to hide. But I'd also seen the truth he was too afraid to admit. The beast hadn't wanted to hurt me. The beast had wanted to be seen. And I'd seen him. Finally, truly seen him. Both halves of the cursed king. And I was beginning to understand what the witch had meant about being truly seen. It wasn't about loving someone despite their flaws. It was about seeing the flaws clearly and choosing them anyway. Chapter 6. Theron didn't come to dinner the next night. Or the night after. For 3 days, I was left alone with my guilt and confusion, wondering if I'd destroyed the fragile connection we'd built. Garrett brought my meals to my chambers with tight-lipped disapproval, and even the library felt less like sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. On the 4th night, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Theron standing in the corridor, still in his formal clothing, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, those silver eyes that had haunted my dreams, were turbulent with emotion. May I come in? He asked quietly. I stepped aside, and he entered, moving to stand by the window. For a long moment, he just stared out at the frozen landscape, his hands clasped behind his back. You shouldn't have come down to the dungeons, he said finally. I know. You could have been hurt, killed. I could have... His voice broke. I could have torn you apart without meaning to. But you didn't. He turned to face me, and I saw the rawness there, the fear and wonder and confusion all tangled together. No, I didn't, and I don't understand why. I moved closer, drawn by something I couldn't name. What do you mean? The beast. It's always violent, always hungry. It fights against the bars, tries to break free, would kill anything that came near. He ran a hand through his hair, agitated. But when you appeared, when you spoke to me, it went still, calm, like the rage, just stopped. All, maybe because I wasn't afraid. Everyone is afraid. He said it like a law of nature. Everyone runs or fights or freezes in terror. But you, he shook his head. You touched the bars, you stayed. Why? Because I wanted to see you. I said simply. All of you. Not just the parts you're willing to show. Something in his expression cracked. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, and pulled me against him, not violently, but desperately, like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. I felt his breath against my bare head, felt the tremor running through his massive frame. You're going to ruin me, he whispered. You're going to make me hope again, and hope is the cruelest thing you can give an immortal. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the proof that he was real and here and not the distant, cold king he pretended to be. Then let me ruin you, I whispered back. I'm already ruined anyway. We can be ruins together. He pulled back just enough to look at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my breath catch. Not love, not yet, but something close. Something dangerous and beautiful and absolutely terrifying. There's more you need to know, he said, his voice rough. About the curse. About why I really chose you. Dread pooled in my stomach. What do you mean? He released me and moved back to the window, putting distance between us like he couldn't bear to see my face when he said what came next. The curse can only be broken by someone who loves both forms, king and beast, without knowing they're the same person. I frowned. But I know. Everyone knows. You transform every night. Yes. But the curse specifies that the person must fall in love with each form separately, must love the beast as beast, and the king as king, before discovering they're one and the same. His shoulders tensed. I've been trying for 200 years to find someone who could do that. I'd appear to women in beast form first, hidden, mysterious. If they showed kindness to the beast, I'd approach them as king. But it never worked. They'd love one or hate both, or you'd run out of time. I finished, understanding creeping over me like frost. Yes. He turned to face me, and his expression was devastated. With you, I thought I could do it differently. You saw me as king first at the ceremony. We've been building something these past weeks, I know we have. And when you went down to the dungeons, when the beast responded to you. He took a shaking breath. I thought maybe this time it would work. Maybe you could love both, and the curse would finally break. But I already know, I said, my voice hollow. I know the beast is you. That contaminated it, didn't it? Now it can't work. The silence that stretched between us was answer enough. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I never meant I didn't want you to go down there. I was trying to keep the forms separate, trying to give the curse a chance to break properly. But you're so stubborn, so determined to see all of me. And now I've ruined everything. The words tasted like ash. No. He crossed to me again, taking my face in his hands with infinite gentleness. No, you gave me something I hadn't had in 2 centuries. You saw both forms and didn't run. Even if it can't break the curse, even if I'm still trapped, you saw me, Vera. Really saw me. And that's... His voice broke. That's more than I deserved. Tears burned in my eyes. This isn't fair. You should be free. You've suffered enough. Life isn't fair. You know that better than anyone. He brushed his thumb across my cheek, catching a tear I hadn't meant to shed. But I got to have these weeks with you. I got to see you smile in my library, got to hear you laugh at my terrible jokes, got to watch you piece together my history like you were solving the world's most fascinating puzzle. That's more than I've had in a very long time. Don't, I said, my voice fierce. Don't talk like this is over. There has to be another way. Some loophole in the curse. I've spent 200 years looking for loopholes. His smile was sad. There aren't any. The witch was very thorough, very angry. He lowered his hands from my face. Which brings me to the other thing I need to tell you. More dread. What? You can't stay here. He said it gently, but the words still hit like a blow. It's not safe. Not anymore. What are you talking about? I'm perfectly safe. Not from me. From yourself. He moved to my writing desk and pulled out a piece of parchment, setting it carefully on the surface. You're already getting attached. I can see it, and I'm... He looked away. I'm falling in love with you, which means when you eventually leave when you grow old or find someone who can give you a real life, it'll destroy me. Again. And I can't. I can't go through that again, Vera. I'm not strong enough. So you're sending me away? Anger rose hot in my throat. You're just giving up? I'm protecting us both. His voice was firm now, taking on that kingly authority. You'll be given an estate in the south. Lands, income, everything you need. You'll be comfortable, free. You can find someone your own age, have a family, live a real life instead of being trapped here with you? I interrupted. That's what you were going to say, wasn't it? Trapped with you? His silence confirmed it. You're a coward, I said, and watched him flinch. You survived 200 years of loneliness, but you can't survive actually caring about someone. You'd rather send me away than risk being hurt again. Yes, he admitted. I would, because at least this way, you'll survive. You'll have a chance at happiness, and I'll go back to what I was before. Alone. Safe. Alone isn't safe, I said, my voice breaking. Alone is just slow death. You taught me that. Then I taught you wrong. He turned toward the door. You'll leave in 3 days. Pack what you want from the library. Take whatever books bring you comfort. Lady Kira will handle the arrangements. Theron, please. Your Majesty, he corrected, and the formality was a wall going up between us. Address me properly, Miss Ashford. He left, and I stood alone in my chambers, fury and heartbreak warring in my chest. He'd given me everything: kindness, understanding, a place where I'd finally felt seen, and now he was taking it away. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. Because 200 years of loss had taught him that love was just another word for inevitable pain. I wanted to hate him, but I understood him too well for that. The next 2 days passed in a blur of grief and anger. I packed mechanically, choosing books from the library with shaking hands, watching servants box up the few belongings I'd accumulated. Garrett tried to talk to me, but I had nothing to say. Lady Kira was efficient and cold, treating my departure like any other logistical problem to solve. Theron didn't come to say goodbye. I told myself I didn't care. Told myself I was better off leaving this frozen castle and its coward king. Told myself I'd forget him within a month. I told myself so many lies. On the evening before my departure, I made one final visit to the library. I wanted to memorize it, the smell of old paper, the way light filtered through the high windows, the exact placement of the astronomy section where I'd spent hours tracing constellations. I was running my hand along a shelf of poetry when I heard the door open. Theron stood in the doorway, and he looked wrecked. His hair was disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, his clothing rumpled like he'd slept in it, if he'd slept at all. I shouldn't be here, he said. Then why are you? Because I'm a fool. He moved into the library, and I saw his hands were shaking. Because I've been trying to convince myself this is the right thing, and I can't. Because the thought of you leaving is worse than any curse Morgessa could have laid on me. Hope flared painful in my chest. Then let me stay. I can't. His voice was anguished. Don't you understand? If you stay, I'll fall completely in love with you, and then I'll have to watch you age and fade and die while I remain, frozen, unable to follow. I've lived through that once. I barely survived it. I won't. I can't. So I'm supposed to leave so you don't have to risk being hurt? I moved toward him, anger giving me courage. What about me, Theron? What about what I want? You deserve better than this. He gestured at himself, at the library, at the castle. Better than a cursed king in a frozen wasteland. Better than a man who transforms into a monster every night. Better than someone who'll never age while you grow old. You deserve warmth and sunlight, and someone who can give you a normal life. I don't want normal. The words burst out of me. I never wanted normal. I wanted to be seen, and you saw me. I wanted to matter, and with you, I mattered. My voice broke. I wanted to keep talking to you every night. I wanted to understand all your stories. I wanted to see the beast again and watch him go still when I touched the bars. I wanted this, Theron. I wanted you. The past tense hung between us like a death knell. His eyes glistened. Vera. But you're too afraid to let yourself have anything good. I continued, tears streaming down my face now. So fine. I'll go. I'll take your estate and your money and your books. I'll build a life somewhere warm. I'll probably even find someone else eventually, someone human and normal and safe. I moved close enough to touch him but didn't. And every night, I'll think about the king who gave me a library and then sent me away, the beast who went still at my touch, the man who taught me I was worth seeing and then decided I wasn't worth keeping. That's not why. Do I? I met his silver eyes. Because from where I'm standing, you're just another person who decided I wasn't worth the risk. My father did it. My stepmother did it. Even Celestine, in her way. And now you. So congratulations, Your Majesty. You fit right in. The words were cruel, meant to wound. They did. I watched them land, watched pain flash across his face. But before he could respond, before I could take them back or make them worse, a guard burst into the library, his face pale. Your Majesty! Riders approaching from the south. They carry the banner of Shadowpine. Theron went rigid. Shadowpine? Why would... He turned to me. Did your father know you were leaving? No, I haven't contacted anyone. Then why? He moved toward the door, then looked back at me. Stay here. Don't leave this library until I come back. Theron, but he was already gone, the guard running to keep up with him. I stood alone among the books, my heart hammering, all our awful goodbye forgotten in the face of new dread. Why would anyone from Shadowpine come here? What could possibly be important enough to make that journey? And why did every instinct I had scream that whatever news they brought, it would change everything? Chapter 7. The Year of Hollow Happiness. I didn't obey. Of course I didn't. Theron had asked me to stay in the library while he dealt with the Shadowpine delegation, but I'd never been good at following orders when they didn't make sense. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, and I wasn't going to hide among books while my world potentially collapsed. I slipped out of the library and followed the distant sounds of voices to the great hall. The scene I found was chaos barely contained. Theron stood at the center, still in his rumpled clothing, facing a group of 5 riders covered in road dust and exhaustion. But it was the figure in the center that made my breath catch. Celestine. My stepsister looked terrible, her golden hair tangled, her dress torn and muddy, her eyes red-rimmed and wild. When she saw me slip into the hall, her face crumpled. Vera. She broke away from the group and ran toward me, grabbing my arms with desperate strength. Oh gods, Vera, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I tried to stop her. I swear I tried. Stop who? Celestine, what's happened? Your stepmother, Theron said, his voice cold with barely contained rage. According to your stepsister, Lady Marin has been arrested for attempted murder. The world tilted. What? Celestine's fingers dug into my arms. She poisoned father. After you left, she became obsessed with the idea that he'd disinherit me to punish her for what she did to you. So her voice broke. She put wolfsbane in his wine. Slow acting. Made it look like illness. He's alive. Barely. The healers caught it in time. Celestine's eyes filled with fresh tears. But when they searched her chambers, they found letters. Plans. She was going to kill me too, Vera, her own daughter, because she thought if we were both dead, she could remarry someone more powerful. I couldn't process it. Marin had always been cruel. But she's been sentenced to death, one of the riders said. A man I recognized as Lord Caldris from the mating ceremony. But she claimed right of appeal to King Theron as the highest authority in the territories. We're required by law to bring the case to you, Your Majesty. Theron's jaw was tight. And my presence is required to oversee the execution? Yes, Your Majesty. Within the fortnight, by tradition. I watched Theron's expression shift through several emotions. Frustration, resignation, something that might have been dark satisfaction. Then I'll return with you to Shadowpine. We leave at first light, Your Majesty. Lady Kira appeared from somewhere behind me, her voice careful. Perhaps Miss Ashford should remain here? Given her history with Lady Marin, It might be. No. The word came out before I could stop it. Everyone turned to look at me. No, I'm going. If Marin is going to die, I want to see it. Theron's silver eyes met mine across the hall, and I saw understanding there. This wasn't about revenge, or not only about revenge. This was about closure. About watching the woman who'd destroyed so much finally face consequences. She comes, Theron said flatly. Prepare horses for departure at dawn. Lord Caldris, your people may rest here tonight. He turned and strode from the hall without another word. Celestine sagged against me, and I found myself supporting her weight. I didn't know what else to do. She whispered. Father is dying. Mother is a monster. And I'm so alone, Vera. I'm so scared. For the first time in our lives, I saw my stepsister clearly not as Marin's golden princess or my tormentor by proxy, but as another victim of the same woman who'd hurt us both. Another girl who'd survived by being compliant, and was now paying the price for her mother's madness. You're not alone, I heard myself say. Come on, let's get you cleaned up and fed. We left for Shadow Pine at dawn. A party of 20 riders moving fast across the frozen landscape. Theron rode at the front, his expression closed off, that distant king mask firmly in place. I rode beside Celestine, who'd been given a horse and traveling clothes from Frostholm's stores. The journey should have taken 5 days. Theron pushed us to make it in 3. He still wasn't speaking to me beyond necessary communication. Our devastating fight in the library hung between us like a ghost. All those cruel words neither of us had taken back, and now, with the interruption of Marin's crimes, we were trapped in this limbo, too much unsaid, too much unresolved, and a death sentence waiting at the end of the road. On the second night, Celestine and I shared a tent while the men kept watch. He loves you, she said quietly, brushing out her hair in the candlelight. King Theron, it's obvious. He has a strange way of showing it. I stared at the tent ceiling. He was sending me away. Before you arrived. Why? Because he's afraid. I turned to look at her. He's immortal, Celestine. Cursed to live forever while everyone he loves dies. He'd rather push me away now than watch me age and die later. She was quiet for a moment. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Despite everything, I almost smiled. It is, isn't it? My father loved my mother, Celestine said softly. My real father, before mother married Lord Ashford. He died when I was 5. Hunting accident. She twisted her hair between her fingers. I barely remember him, but I remember my mother before his death. She was different, warm. She used to sing to me. What happened? Grief, I think. She couldn't accept that he was gone, so she became what she is now, grasping, cruel, desperate to control everything because she couldn't control death. Celestine looked at me. Your king is doing the same thing. He's trying to control the pain by avoiding it entirely. But that's not living. That's just slowly dying while your heart still beats. She was right. And the worst part was, I'd been doing the same thing in Shadowpine, surviving instead of living, building walls instead of connections, telling myself stories instead of facing reality. Theron and I were the same in that way. 2 people so afraid of being hurt that we'd chosen numbness over risk. I was falling in love with him, I admitted quietly. Maybe already had. And then he pushed me away, and I said terrible things, and now I don't know how to fix it. Do you want to fix it? Yes. But I don't know if he'll let me. Celestine squeezed my hand. Then make him let you. You're the girl who showed up bald to a mating ceremony and got chosen by a king. You're stronger than you think, Vera. We reached Shadowpine on the 3rd day. The keep looked exactly as I remembered, gray stone towers, the familiar courtyard, the halls where I'd spent 18 years becoming invisible, but everything felt smaller somehow, less significant. Like I'd outgrown this place without realizing it. My father was in his chambers, barely conscious, tended by healers who shook their heads when asked about his prognosis. I stood in the doorway, looking at this man who'd once loved me, and then forgotten how, and felt nothing. Just a hollow space where emotion should have been. Will he survive? I asked the head healer. Perhaps. If the poison hasn't damaged too much. But he'll never be the same, my lady. He'd never been the same since my mother died. This was just one more step in his long fade into nothing. Maren was in the dungeons. Theron went to see her that evening, and I followed without asking permission. If he objected, he didn't say so. We descended into the same cold cells where criminals were kept awaiting judgment. My stepmother sat on a stone bench, still wearing the fine dress she'd been arrested in, though it was filthy now. When she saw me, her face twisted with rage. "You," she hissed. "This is your fault, your curse. Everything went wrong after you left. I'm not the one who poisoned my husband," I said calmly. "He was going to disinherit Celestine, going to give everything to you out of guilt. I couldn't let that happen. So you decided to kill him?" Theron's voice was cold. "And your own daughter? Celestine is weak, useless, just like her father was." Maren's eyes were wild. "I did what I had to do to survive. That's what you do, isn't it, girl?" She looked at me. "You survived by being pathetic, by making people pity you." "Well, I survived by being strong." "No," I said quietly. "You survived by being cruel, and now you're going to die for it." Something flickered in her expression, then fear, finally, real fear. "The execution is tomorrow at dawn," Theron said. "You've been given last rites and the opportunity to confess. Use your remaining time wisely." We left her there, screaming curses at our backs. Outside the dungeons, Theron finally spoke to me. "You didn't have to come down here." "Yes, I did. I needed to see that she was real, that she couldn't hurt me anymore." He studied me in the torchlight. "And? Did it help?" "Yes." I met his silver eyes. "She's just a woman. A broken, bitter woman who made terrible choices. She's not the monster I built her up to be in my mind. She's just sad." Something in his expression shifted. "We need to talk." "Yes, we do. After the execution, after this is finished, we'll—" "Your Majesty!" A guard came running. "The prisoner. She's—" We ran back to the dungeons. Maren lay on the stone floor, foam at her lips, her body already going cold. On the bench sat an empty vial poison she must have hidden in her clothing. "She chose death on her own terms," the guard said, his voice shaking. Rather than face public execution, I stared at her body and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief. Just a vast, empty relief that she was gone and could hurt no one ever again. "Well," Theron said quietly, "that solves that. With Maren dead and my father barely clinging to life, there was no reason to stay in Shadowpine. Celestine was named temporary regent until father recovered or died. She begged me to stay, but we both knew I couldn't. This wasn't my home anymore. Maybe it never had been." On our last night before returning to Frostholm, Theron came to my old chambers. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "About what you said. About me being a coward. Theron, you were right." He moved to the window, the same window I'd stared out of so many times, dreaming of escape. "I am a coward. I've spent 200 years hiding behind my curse, using it as an excuse to never risk being hurt again. And when you came along and made me feel something real, something that mattered, I panicked." He turned to face me. "I told myself I was protecting you by sending you away, but really, I was protecting myself." "I know," I said softly. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to come back to Frostholm. You have an estate waiting, money, freedom, everything I promised you. You can go live your life, and I'll—" He swallowed hard. "I'll go back to being alone. Like I deserve." I crossed the room and took his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. "You're an idiot," I said. "A brilliant, ancient, absolutely infuriating idiot. I know. I'm coming back to Frostholm." His eyes widened. "Vera, not because I have nowhere else to go, not because you're a king, or because you gave me a library, or because I pity you." I held his gaze. "I'm coming back. Because when I'm with you, I don't disappear. Because you see me, really see me. And somehow that makes me see myself clearly too. Because I'd rather have whatever time we get, however long or short, than spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. You'll age. I won't. You'll die. I won't. I know. And that's going to hurt, for both of us. But at least it'll be real pain from real love, not the hollow ache of safety and loneliness. I smiled, though tears burned in my eyes. You taught me that surviving isn't the same as living, so let's live, Theron, for however long we can, and when my time comes, you can grieve me properly instead of spending eternity regretting that you never let yourself love me. He pulled me against him, his arms crushing me close, his face buried in the curve of my neck. I already love you, he whispered against my skin. I've been trying not to, but I do. I love you so much, it terrifies me. Good, I whispered back. Be terrified. I am too. Let's be terrified together. We held each other in that old room where I'd spent so many nights dreaming of escape, and I realized I'd finally found what I'd been looking for. Not rescue, not safety, just someone willing to be afraid with me. We returned to Frostholm a week later, and for the next year, I was happy, genuinely, completely happy in a way I'd never been before. Theron and I fell into a rhythm. Days in the library, reading together or separately, sharing passages that moved us. Evenings at dinner, talking about everything and nothing, his centuries of experience meeting my curiosity about the world. Nights when he'd visit my chambers before the transformation, just to hold me, to memorize the feel of me before the beast took over. And some nights, I'd go down to the dungeons. I'd sit outside the cell and talk to the beast. Tell him stories, read him poetry, share the small details of my day. At first, he'd just watch me with those silver eyes, that massive form eerily still. But gradually, he began to respond small gestures, soft sounds, a gentleness that seemed impossible in something so monstrous. I never touched him again after that first night. The bars stayed between us, a necessary boundary, but I saw him. Every night that I could, I made sure he knew he wasn't alone in the darkness. Theron never asked what I said to the beast. I think he was afraid to know. The months passed in a blur of books and conversations and slow-building intimacy. We never consummated our relationship. Some old-fashioned part of Theron insisted on waiting for a proper wedding, and I didn't push. There was something almost sweet about it, this ancient king who'd seen everything being awkward and careful with me. Every night, he asked the same question, "Will you marry me?" Every morning, I gave the same answer, "Not yet." Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid that once we made it official, once we bound ourselves together with vows and ceremony, the fragile bubble of happiness we'd built would pop. Stupid, in retrospect. But fear makes us all stupid sometimes. Then, one morning, Garrett came to my chambers with news that made my blood freeze. "There's a delegation arriving from the Eastern Territories," he said, his face pale. "King Theron is hosting them for a diplomatic summit, and there's to be a ball, a celebration." "Why do you look like someone died?" "Because," he hesitated, "because there are rumors about an engagement between King Theron and Princess Lyanna of the Eastern Territories." The world tilted. "That's impossible," I said. "He wouldn't. The Eastern Territories control the trade routes we need for winter supplies. They've been threatening to cut us off unless Theron makes a political marriage." Garrett's eyes were full of sympathy. "I'm sure it's just rumor. I'm sure he'd never actually," but I barely heard him. All I could think was, he found someone else. Someone who didn't know the beast was the king. Someone who could break the curse properly. And he was going to marry her. Chapter 8. The Wedding That Wasn't. I didn't confront Theron immediately. That would have been the smart thing to do, to march into his chambers and demand the truth. But I was afraid, terrified, actually. Because if the rumors were true, if he'd actually found someone who could break the curse properly, what right did I have to interfere? He deserved to be free, even if it destroyed me. So instead, I hid in the library like a coward, surrounded by books that suddenly felt meaningless. Words on pages couldn't warm me, couldn't make the hollow ache in my chest stop spreading. 3 days passed before Theron came looking for me. I heard his footsteps echo through the library, measured and deliberate. When he appeared around the bookshelf where I'd been pretending to read the same page for an hour, His expression was carefully neutral. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "I've been reading. For 3 days straight? Without coming to dinner?" He moved closer, and I saw the tension in his shoulders. "Garrett told you about the delegation." "Yes. And you assumed the worst." I finally looked up at him, and I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. "Is it the worst? Or is it what needs to happen?" He sat down across from me, his silver eyes searching my face. "Princess Liana arrives tomorrow with her father, the Eastern King. There will be a summit, a ball, and yes, her father is pushing for a marriage alliance." Each word was a knife. "And you're considering it?" "I'm a king, Vera. I have to consider everything that affects my people. The Eastern territories control trade routes we desperately need. They've been threatening blockades unless you marry the princess." I set down my book with shaking hands. "Can she break the curse?" His silence was answer enough. "She doesn't know, does she?" I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "About the beast. You haven't told her, which means if she falls in love with you as king, and then encounters the beast separately." I couldn't finish the sentence. "It's possible," he admitted quietly. "Her father has been corresponding with Lady Kira for months. The princess is young, idealistic. She's expressed interest in meeting the cursed king she's heard stories about. She sees it as romantic, a chance to be a savior. How nice for her." The bitterness in my voice was ugly, but I couldn't help it. "Vera, no, I understand." I stood, needing distance from him. "You've spent 200 years waiting for this chance. Someone who doesn't know the king and beast are the same person. Someone who can break the curse properly. I'm just the contaminated experiment, remember? The one who ruined it by going down to the dungeons? Don't do that." His voice hardened. "Don't twist this into something it's not." "Then what is it?" I spun to face him. "Explain it to me, because from where I'm standing, you're choosing a chance at freedom over—" I cut myself off before I could say it. "Over you." He finished the sentence, standing now, his expression raw. "That's what you were going to say. That I'm choosing the curse over you, aren't you?" "I don't know." The words burst out of him, anguished. "I don't know what to choose, Vera. I love you, gods. I love you so much I can barely breathe around it. But I've been trapped for 200 years. 200 years of transforming every night. Of being alone. Of watching everyone I care about die while I remain. And now there's a chance, maybe just a chance, that I could finally be free of it. That I could age normally, die normally, have a real life instead of this endless frozen existence. With her," I said quietly. "Not with me. No. Not with you." His voice broke. "Because even if the curse breaks with Liana, I'd still love you. I'd still want you, but at least I'd be free to grow old with whoever I chose, instead of watching them fade while I stay frozen at 35. The logic was sound. Horrible, but sound. "So, what do you want from me?" I asked, tears burning in my eyes. "Permission? Blessing? Should I smile and wish you well while you court another woman?" "I want—" He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I want you to tell me I'm making the wrong choice. I want you to fight for me. I want you to give me a reason to turn down this chance at freedom, even though it's selfish and unfair to ask that of you. You want me to make the decision for you," I said, understanding flooding through me. "So you don't have to feel guilty about either choice." He flinched. "That's not—" "Yes, it is." I moved toward him, my vision blurring with tears I refused to shed. "You want me to either set you free gracefully, so you can break the curse without guilt, or you want me to beg you to stay, so you can blame me for keeping you trapped. Either way, you don't have to take responsibility for what you want. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. You taught me that, remember?" I stopped just in front of him. "Here's what I'll tell you, Theron. I love you. I love both versions of you, the king who gave me a library, and the beast who goes still when I read poetry. I love your terrible jokes and your 200-year-old stories and the way you look at me like I'm something precious instead of something broken." My voice cracked. "But I won't beg you to stay. I won't make this decision for you. If you want to pursue Princess Liana, if you want to try to break the curse with her, then do it. I'll leave Frostholm and you'll never have to see me again. But if you choose me, if you choose us, then you're choosing this life. The curse, the transformation, all of it. And you don't get to resent me for it later." He stared at me, something desperate in his silver eyes. "What if I can't choose? What if I don't know what I want? Then you've already chosen." I stepped back, putting distance between us. "Because if you loved me enough, there wouldn't be a choice. The curse wouldn't matter. The princess wouldn't matter. Nothing would matter except us. It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple." I turned away, unable to look at him anymore. "Princess Lyanna arrives tomorrow. You have until then to decide. If you choose to pursue her, I'll pack my things and be gone before the ball. If you choose me—" I looked back at him. "Then tell her no. Publicly. Let her father threaten whatever he wants. Choose us, Theron, or let me go." I walked away before he could respond, leaving him alone in the library we'd made ours. Princess Lyanna arrived the next day in a procession of gilt carriages and silk banners. I watched from my window as the courtyard filled with Eastern dignitaries. The princess herself was stunning, tall and willowy, with hair like spun copper and the kind of effortless grace that came from a lifetime of being told you were special. She was young, maybe 20, with the bright-eyed optimism of someone who'd never truly suffered. Everything I wasn't. Theron greeted them formally, every inch the king cold, distant, powerful. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw the princess smile at him, saw her father clasp Theron's shoulder with familiarity that made my stomach turn. I didn't go down to meet them. Instead, I began packing. Garrett found me an hour later, my trunk half filled with books and the few belongings I'd accumulated over the past year. "You're leaving," he said flatly. He hasn't come to tell me otherwise. Maybe he's still deciding. 9. There's nothing to decide, Garrett. He wants the curse broken. She's his best chance. I'm just in the way. I folded a dress with shaking hands. Better to leave now, before I have to watch him fall in love with someone else. You're making assumptions. Am I? I turned to face him. Have you seen him today? Has he asked for me? Has he given any indication that he's chosen me? Garrett's silence was damning. I thought not. I returned to packing. It's fine. I always knew this was temporary. I thought I'd have more time. The ball is tonight, Garrett said quietly. Will you at least stay for that? See what happens? Why torture myself? Because you deserve to see the truth. Whatever it is. His expression was gentle. And because if you leave now, you'll always wonder. Always question whether you gave up too soon. He was right, damn him. Fine, I agreed. I'll stay for the ball. But after that, I'm gone. I dressed for the ball with meticulous care, not out of vanity, but out of pride. If this was my last night at Frostholm, I'd leave with dignity intact. I chose a dress in deep midnight blue, the color of the sky just before dawn. It had silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. Without hair to style, I wore a delicate silver circlet instead, something Lady Kira had quietly left in my chambers with a note. You are stronger than you know. I looked like myself. Not a princess, not a beauty, but something else. Something harder and truer. The ball was being held in the great hall, and as I descended the stairs, I heard music drifting through the corridors, violins and drums and laughter. The hall had been transformed, candles everywhere, casting warm light that fought back the perpetual cold, tables laden with food, dancers swirling across the polished floor, and in the center of it all, standing near the dais, Theron and Princess Lyanna. They weren't dancing, just talking. But there was something in the way she leaned toward him, the way she laughed at whatever he'd said, that made my chest tight. She was radiant, appropriate, everything a king's wife should be. And Theron. Theron looked like he was trying very hard to be interested. I grabbed a glass of wine from a passing servant and retreated to the shadows along the wall. No one noticed me. I was good at being invisible when I wanted to be. There you are. I turned to find Lady Kira beside me, her expression unreadable. I'm leaving after this, I told her. Thought you should know. You'll need to reassign my chambers. She studied the dance floor. And if His Majesty asks you to stay? He won't. You're certain of that? Look at her, Lady Kira, look at him. She's perfect, and I'm just the woman he loves. Lady Kira interrupted softly. Don't mistake political necessity for affection, girl. He's doing his duty, but his heart isn't in it. Before I could respond, the music changed a dramatic flourish that signaled an announcement. The Eastern King stepped forward, his voice booming. Noble guests, it is my great pleasure to announce the engagement of my daughter, Princess Lyanna, to King Theron of Frostholm. The hall erupted in applause. I felt my heart crack clean in two. Theron's expression was carefully blank as Lyanna took his arm, beaming. They looked perfect together, the powerful king and the beautiful princess. A fairy tale come to life. I set down my wineglass very carefully and turned toward the door. I'd seen enough. But before I could take 2 steps, the hall's main doors burst open. A group of masked figures stormed in, 6, maybe 7, all armed with crossbows and blades. The music cut off, screams erupted. Theron's guards moved instantly, forming a protective barrier around the king and princess. Assassins! Someone shouted. Everything happened too fast. The masked figures fired their crossbows not at random, but with terrible precision. At Theron, 3 bolts slammed into his chest before his guards could shield him. He staggered, blood blooming across his formal attire. Princess Lyanna screamed and ran, abandoning him without hesitation. And I moved without thinking. I pushed through the panicking crowd, past guards trying to evacuate nobility, straight toward Theron. One of the assassins saw me coming and raised his crossbow. I saw the bolt release, saw it arc toward me. Theron appeared in front of me, his massive form shielding me even as another bolt buried itself in his shoulder. You idiot, I gasped, catching him as he fell to one knee. Why would you? You matter more than the curse, he gritted out, his face pale with pain. Always did. I was just too afraid to. The transformation began, not slowly, like usual, violently. His body convulsing, bones cracking and reshaping, fur erupting from skin. I heard people screaming, heard guards shouting to get away from him, but I didn't move. The beast rose where the king had fallen, massive, terrifying, covered in midnight fur and burning with those silver eyes. 3 crossbow bolts protruded from his chest, and blood matted his fur. But he was alive, healing already, the curse's one terrible gift. He turned those silver eyes on me, and I saw recognition there. Saw him fighting the beast's instincts, trying to remain himself. I'm not afraid, I told him quietly, even as chaos exploded around us. I see you, Theron, both of you, and I'm not afraid. The beast made a sound. Grief and gratitude tangled together. Then he turned on the assassins. What followed was carnage. The beast moved with impossible speed, tearing through the masked figures with brutal efficiency. They tried to run, tried to fight, but they'd made the mistake of threatening what he loved. Within minutes, it was over, the assassins dead or fleeing, guards securing the hall, nobility huddled in terrified groups. And in the center of it all, the beast stood panting, covered in blood, some his, most not, staring at the horror on every face. They'd all seen now. The king and the beast were one and the same. Princess Lyanna stood near the dais, her face white with terror, her earlier fascination with the cursed king replaced by pure revulsion. Monster, she whispered. You're a monster. The beast's shoulders sagged. This was what he'd feared. This was why he'd hidden for 200 years. I walked toward him. Vera, no? Garrett's voice. Get back, he's dangerous. I ignored him. Ignored everyone. I walked straight up to the beast and placed my hand on his massive chest, right over his rapidly healing heart. You saved me, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You've been saving me since the moment you chose me. King and beast, both of you. And I love both of you. Completely. Without reservation. Without fear. The beast went utterly still, and then, impossibly, he began to glow. Light erupted from his skin, white and silver and blinding. I heard gasps, or heard someone shout something about magic, but I couldn't look away. The beast's form began to shift again, shrinking, changing, becoming human. Theron collapsed into my arms, fully human, fully himself, the crossbow bolts clattering to the floor as healed flesh closed over the wounds. He was breathing hard, his eyes wide with shock. "The curse," he whispered. "It's gone. I can feel it. It's gone." Around us, silence. Then Lady Kira's voice, quiet and awed. She broke it. She loved both forms, saw both as one, and loved him anyway. "The curse is broken." Theron stared up at me, tears streaming down his face. "You broke my curse." "No," I said, helping him to his feet. "We broke it, together. By choosing each other even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when there was no promise it would work." He pulled me against him, his arms crushing me close, and I felt him shaking. "I chose wrong," he whispered against my hair. "I almost chose the princess, the curse, the safety of not risking my heart. I almost lost you. But you didn't." I pulled back to look at him. "When it mattered, when someone tried to hurt me, you chose me. You transformed in front of everyone, exposed everything you'd hidden, all to protect me. That's when the curse broke, Theron. When you chose love over fear." He kissed me then, in front of the entire court, covered in blood and glory, and 200 years of loneliness finally ending. When we broke apart, the hall remained silent. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Garrett, then Lady Kira, then more, until applause thundered through the great hall. The Eastern King looked furious. Princess Lyanna looked ill, but neither of them mattered anymore. Theron turned to address the court, his voice carrying, "The engagement to Princess Lyanna is dissolved. Whatever political consequences follow, I'll face them. But I will not marry anyone except this woman." He took my hand, raising it high. "Vera Ashford, who saw me when no one else could. Who loved me when I didn't deserve it. Who broke a 200-year curse with nothing but courage and truth." He looked down at me, and I saw forever in his eyes. Not cursed forever. Just forever. "Will you marry me?" he asked, that familiar question taking on new meaning. And for the first time, I gave a different answer. "Yes." Epilogue. The promise kept. 10 months later. The library looked different in winter sunlight. I'd spent so many nights here by candlelight, hiding among the books while Theron transformed in the dungeons below. But now, in the pale afternoon light filtering through frost-covered windows, it felt like an entirely different room. Warmer, more real, less like a sanctuary and more like home. I ran my fingers along the astronomy section, my favorite, and smiled at the memory of Theron, explaining constellations to me, his ancient knowledge making the stars feel like old friends rather than distant mysteries. "You're doing it again." I turned to find him leaning against the doorway, watching me with those silver eyes that no longer made me think of winter. Now they just made me think of safety. "Doing what?" I asked. "Touching the books like you're afraid they'll disappear." He moved into the library with that same predatory grace, though now it only made my heart race in the best way. "They're not going anywhere, Vera. Neither am I." I know. I did know. But part of me still expected to wake up back in Shadowpine, bald and broken, with all of this revealed as just another story I'd told myself to survive. Theron crossed to me and took my hand, the one that had been tracing book spines, and pressed it against his chest. His heartbeat was steady under my palm. "Real. Present. We've been married for 7 months, he said quietly. "I've woken up beside you for 213 mornings. I've held you through nightmares and listened to you read poetry until dawn. I've watched you reorganize this library 4 times because you couldn't decide between alphabetical and thematic ordering." His lips twitched. "At what point do you think you'll believe this is permanent?" "I believe it," I protested. "Your head believes it. Your heart is still waiting for me to send you away again." He cupped my face with his free hand, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. "I was an idiot once. I won't be an idiot twice." I leaned into his touch, letting myself feel the full weight of being loved. It still felt strange sometimes being wanted instead of tolerated, being seen instead of invisible, being chosen, again and again, by someone who could have had anyone. "Father died last week," I said abruptly. "Celestine sent word this morning." Theron's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "I'm not. The truth of it sat heavy on my tongue. Is that terrible? That I feel nothing but relief? No. He pulled me against him, and I buried my face in his chest, breathing in the scent of pine and ice that clung to him. He stopped being your father long before he died. You're allowed to grieve what he should have been without mourning what he was. This was why I loved him. Not because he was a king, or because he'd broken a curse, or because he'd chosen me in that hall when no one else would. I loved him because he understood that some wounds didn't heal, they just became part of your landscape. And he never tried to fix what was broken in me. He just held me while I existed with it. Celestine wants us to visit, I said against his shirt, for the funeral, and to discuss the estate. Do you want to go? I pulled back to look at him. Would you come with me? To Shadowpine? Vera. His voice carried that gentle exasperation he used when I asked obvious questions. I would follow you into the underworld if you asked. Shadowpine is nothing. Even though, I hesitated, even though people will see you, the king and the beast? Since the curse broke, Theron's transformation hadn't disappeared entirely. He could still shift into that massive, midnight-furred beast, but now it was choice, not compulsion. Most nights, he stayed human, but sometimes, when the moon was full or his emotions ran high, I'd wake to find silver eyes gleaming in the darkness, and I'd know the beast had come to simply be near me. I'd learned to love both forms equally. The king who gave me libraries and patient conversation. The beast who curled around me protectively. Massive and warm and utterly gentle, but the rest of the world was still learning. Still whispering, still afraid. Let them see, Theron said, his voice carrying that cold authority that made nobles tremble. Then it softened. Besides, half of Shadowpine already knows. It's not exactly a secret when your king transforms into a giant wolf creature during an assassination attempt. I laughed despite myself. Fair point. He tilted my chin up, studying my face with that intensity that still made me breathless. You're different today. What's really bothering you? This was the other thing I loved about him. He could read me like I read books, could see past my words to the truth underneath. I've been thinking about the riddle, I admitted. Which one? Your riddle, the one you asked me that first night. I moved back to the window, looking out at the frozen landscape beyond. A promise, that was the answer. Something given but never taken, broken but never mended, binding but weightless. Yes. He came to stand beside me, our shoulders touching. Why? Because I finally understand why you asked it. I turned to face him. You weren't testing my intelligence. You were asking if I understood what matters, if I knew the difference between words and commitment, between vows and truth. His silver eyes gleamed with something that might have been pride. And I think. I reached for his hand, lacing our fingers together. I think you were also asking yourself if you could risk making a promise again. After Morgessa, after everyone you'd loved and lost, you were asking if promises even meant anything anymore. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you think the answer is? I think promises are terrifying, I said honestly. Because they're made with incomplete information. You promise to love someone forever, but you don't know who they'll become. You promise to stay, but you don't know what will try to tear you apart. You promise to choose someone, but you don't know what that choice will cost. So promises are foolish? No. I squeezed his hand. Promises are brave. Because you make them anyway. Knowing you might break. Knowing the other person might break. Knowing the world will test you. You make them anyway because some things are worth the risk of being wrong. Theron pulled me against him again, and I felt his chest shake with something between laughter and tears. How did I get so lucky? That you walked into that ceremony, bald and furious and absolutely refusing to disappear? You chose me, I said simply. And I chose you back. That's all promises ever are, two people choosing each other when they could choose safety instead. We stood there in the winter sunlight, holding each other in comfortable silence, until a knock interrupted us. Garrett poked his head in, his expression apologetic. Your Majesties, the delegation from the Eastern Territories is here. King Roland wishes to discuss the trade routes. Theron sighed. The ones he threatened to blockade unless I married his daughter? The very same, sire. I felt Theron tense slightly, that old wariness returning. The Eastern king had not taken the broken engagement well. Princess Liana had been humiliated, and political grudges died slowly. "Tell him we'll meet him in the throne room," Theron said. Then, quieter. "And make sure the guards are positioned." Garrett nodded and disappeared. "You think he'll try something?" I asked. "I think powerful men don't like being told no." Theron released me reluctantly. "I think he's here to test whether I'll prioritize my kingdom over my wife, whether I'll make the smart political choice. And will you?" He looked at me, and that cold, ancient king mask slipped back into place, the one he wore when making decisions that affected thousands. But his voice, when he spoke, was gentle. "I spent 200 years making smart political choices, and all it earned me was loneliness. I'm done choosing kingdoms over the people I love." He touched my face one more time. "But I need you to understand this might mean war. Trade embargoes at minimum. Our people will suffer. And it will be because I chose you." "Then we'll find another way," I said firmly. "We'll negotiate. We'll make new alliances. We'll do it together," he interrupted. "That's the point, Vera. I'm not carrying this alone anymore. You're not just my wife. You're my partner, my queen. So we'll face King Roland together, and whatever comes after, we'll face that together too." The word queen still felt strange. I'd never expected to be anyone important, just wanted to be seen. But somehow, I'd become the queen of the Northern Territories, the woman who'd broken a 200-year curse, the bald girl who'd been chosen by a king and had chosen him right back. "Together," I agreed. We walked to the throne room, hand in hand, and I noticed he'd positioned me at his right side, equal level, not below. When we entered, King Roland and his entourage were already waiting, their expressions a mix of barely concealed hostility and diplomatic neutrality. "King Theron," Roland said, his voice carefully pleasant, "and your wife." The slight pause before wife was deliberate, an insult dressed as courtesy. "Queen Vera," Theron corrected, his voice dropping to that lethal softness that made even alphas nervous. "You will address her with proper respect, or this meeting ends now." Roland's jaw tightened. "Of course, Queen Vera. My apologies." I inclined my head slightly, refusing to be intimidated by this man who'd tried to use his daughter as a political weapon. "King Roland, thank you for traveling so far. I understand you wish to discuss trade routes, among other things." His eyes swept over me with barely disguised contempt. "I'm curious, Your Majesty. What does the North offer that my daughter did not?" The room went silent. Theron's hand tightened on mine, but I spoke before he could. "The North offers partnership instead of transaction. It offers honest alliance instead of coerced marriage. And it offers the understanding that people are not commodities to be traded for shipping routes." Roland's face flushed. "That's not— You offered your daughter to break a curse," I continued, my voice calm but carrying. "Not because you loved King Theron or wanted your daughter's happiness. You wanted access to northern resources and the prestige of having your bloodline tied to an immortal king. When that didn't work out, you threatened to starve our people unless given compensation." I smiled, and it wasn't kind. "So forgive me if I don't feel guilty about your wounded pride." The silence that followed was thunderous. Then, unexpectedly, Roland laughed short and sharp. "Your Majesty is quite direct." "I learned from the best," I said, glancing at Theron. Roland studied us both, and something in his expression shifted, calculation replacing hostility. "Very well. Let's negotiate properly then. No threats, no coercion. What does the North need, and what can the East provide? And what do you offer in return?" What followed was 3 hours of intense diplomatic discussion. Theron handled the military aspects while I focused on trade and resources, surprised by how much I'd absorbed from months of sitting in on council meetings. We offered mineral rights in exchange for open trade routes, promised military support if the East faced external threats, in return for grain shipments during harsh winters. By the end, we had the framework of a real alliance, one built on mutual benefit instead of grudges. As King Roland prepared to leave, he paused in front of me. "I underestimated you, Queen Vera. I saw only what you lacked: status, family connections, appearance. I didn't see what you possessed. "And what's that?" I asked. "A spine," he said bluntly. Then, almost grudgingly, "My daughter would have made King Theron miserable. She's lovely and accomplished, but she's never had to fight for anything. She wouldn't have understood him." He glanced at Theron. "You chose well, even if you chose poorly for politics." "I chose perfectly for everything that matters," Theron said. After they left, I collapsed onto the throne with a very unqueenly sigh. That was exhausting. Theron laughed, really laughed, the sound echoing through the empty hall. "You told an Eastern king that his daughter was a commodity. You realize that, right?" I was diplomatic about it. "You were terrifying." He pulled me up and kissed me thoroughly. "I've never been more attracted to you. Even when I stood up to the beast that first night? Especially compared to that. Back then, you were surviving. Today," he traced my cheekbone with his thumb. "Today you were living. Thriving. Being exactly who you were meant to be." That night, in our private chambers, I found Theron sitting at the window in beast form. It still startled me sometimes how massive he was, how otherworldly, but I'd long since stopped being afraid. I moved to sit beside him, and he lowered his great head onto my lap, a rumbling sound of contentment coming from his chest. "Bad day?" I asked, stroking the midnight fur. The beast made that huffing sound that meant yes. "Want to talk about it? Or just this?" He nudged my hand with his nose, the latter. So we sat in comfortable silence, me reading poetry aloud while he listened, exactly as we'd done in those early days when I'd visited him in the dungeons. Except now there were no bars between us, no curse forcing the transformation, just a king who sometimes needed to be a beast, and a queen who loved both. "Do you remember?" I said softly, "when you asked me that first night? Will you marry me?" The beast's ears pricked forward, listening, and I kept saying not yet. For months I said not yet, because I was afraid that the moment I said yes, something would come and destroy it all. I set down my book and looked at him, those silver eyes gleaming in the darkness. I spent so long waiting for disaster that I almost missed out on happiness. The beast shifted, and then Theron was there instead, naked and human and beautiful in the moonlight. "And now?" he asked quietly. "Now I say yes." I took his face in my hands. "Every morning when I wake up beside you, every night when you ask if I'm staying, every moment someone asks if I'm sure about this life." I kissed him softly. "Yes, yes, yes, 1,000 times yes, because I'm done waiting for disaster. I'm done being afraid of losing what I love. I'm just going to love you, for however long we get." His eyes glistened. "That's a promise, you know." "I know, and promises are brave," I finished, "because we make them anyway." He pulled me close, and we stayed like that until dawn. Two people who'd been broken by the world, choosing to be whole together. Two people who'd learned that love wasn't about being perfect, or even being fixed. It was about being seen, completely and honestly, and choosing each other anyway. In the morning, I woke to find Theron, already awake, watching me with that soft expression he wore when he thought I was sleeping. "Good morning," I murmured. "Will you marry me?" he asked. I smiled. "We're already married." "I know, but I want to keep choosing you." "Then yes," I said, like I would every morning for the rest of our lives. Yes, and in that moment, surrounded by winter sunlight, and the man who'd taught me that being broken didn't make me worthless, I finally understood what the riddle had always meant. A promise wasn't just words spoken, it was a choice made, over and over again, even when it was hard. Even when fear whispered that you'd lose everything, even when the world offered easier paths. Theron had promised to see me, really see me, and he'd kept that promise every day since. I'd promised to stay to choose him in this life, and I was keeping that promise too. Some promises, I'd learned, were meant to be kept forever, not because they were easy, but because they were worth it. If you enjoyed Vera and Theron's journey and want more captivating alpha romance, don't miss the alpha's second chance, displayed on your screen right now. Click the link in the description to grab your copy. And if this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share with fellow romance lovers. Thank you for listening, and until next time, May you always choose love over fear.